Ready?
Okay, yes, we are. I'm,
It's not 6.
3.
Oh, it's after 6.
It's taking a little slow.
Yeah,
think
that's
we
what
need
I
a new
looked at.
battery or a new
But
clock.
I looked at Apple time here and convinced myself that it actually is 6:03. So I will call to order Tuesday, October 2nd.
Camera's not on.
Oh, camera's
Are we
on?
live?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you are?
That's what I
Okay.
thought. I will call to order Tuesday, October 2nd, Board of Selectmen of Wenham meeting. We are, again, with 2 selectmen. We do have a quorum, but our third selectman, Jack Wilhelm, is not able to be with us this evening, so it will be John and myself. And Peter, of
I am
course.
here. We are here.
And a short agenda, although the one item, our annual town meeting debrief, which is later on the agenda, will take a little time. We will start, as we always do, with public input for items that are not on the agenda. I have a feeling, once again, that
I'm not
there are
noticing any
none.
hands up or,
Okay, so we'll skip right past that. And we have, in our new tradition, have all one of our announcements done by one
again.
person.
I get picked on well.
I know. So, John, it looks like you have the announcement.
All right. Well, not only as a selectman, but also as the chairman of the board of directors for the Eastern Essex Veteran Service Program, I'm really pleased to announce that the Board of Selectmen meeting for the Eastern Essex Veteran Service Program wanted the folks to know in our communities that, and I'll read the following. Wreaths Across America, the Wreaths Across America Committee volunteers are requesting volunteers. On Saturday, December 15th, the town of Wenham will lay wreaths on our veterans' graves simultaneous with participants at Arlington National Cemetery and communities across the nation. In order to coordinate our local efforts, a Wreaths Across America committee of volunteers is being formed by the Eastern Essex Veterans Department of Veteran Services. Please join our first planning meeting on Wednesday, October 3rd at 6 o'clock at the Ipswich Town Hall in the Veteran Service office, and contact Karen Tyler, who is our director of Veteran Services, at 978-356-3915 or Tyler at eessexvets.com. And then, yeah, the first meeting, okay, I guess that's pretty much all of the information at this time. So if you are inclined to want to join this group, I would strongly encourage it. I plan on being there myself, but this is for all of us to start to think about the veterans service, respect for all of our veterans who are no longer with us. And if you're not familiar with the Wreaths Across America, it's a project that has been going on for quite some decades now, and there are something like 50, 60, 80,000 wreaths that are collected and manufactured up in northern Maine, trucked from Maine down to Arlington. They make numerous stops. They have stopped here in Wenham and Hamilton before. They've stopped in Topsfield a couple of years. I have met the 2 men who started this and who keep it going. Top shelf people, and it's to respect our veterans at the time of Christmas. And they have a very serious time clock to do all this, and so I guess now they're trying to coordinate a recognition by each community across the country for this same time frame.
So, because I've never heard a request for a committee before, so they are doing something.
This is brand new.
Different than
Yes.
has been done.
Yep. So this is a local.
We're going to be
recognition.
laying the wreaths at our local veterans' graves this year, which is something that we hadn't done before. Newbury, I think, is the only other community on the North Shore that's done it, so we're planning to do it in Hamilton and Wenham.
And there'll be some other, it doesn't seem like we would need a committee to do that.
So
there's
there are a fair amount of logistics behind the scenes to
Great.
sort through, and I know that Karen has reached out to our Veterans Committee, and Gary Cheeseman and Bill Wilson so far have volunteered to serve on this committee, and so hoping to get a couple others, maybe some people who might not necessarily be on the Veterans Committee, just some residents who'd be interested in getting involved.
Yeah, and I asked because I wondered if there were going to be opportunities for people who are not on the committee to actually lay some wreaths. I would be very happy to be a part of that process.
Well, no reason
but
there aren't
can't go to the meetings.
other folks can't be there and be
Oh.
part of this committee, so, yeah, they need many
It's a-
hands overall, but I don't know the details of what, as Peter said, what they're going to do overall, so.
Yeah, and we'll definitely,
keep
obviously,
us-
once,
We'll have more
Yeah.
communication for the folks here.
It's nice. It's
We
very,
don't
very
make it.
nice. The Wreaths Across America program as it has existed is amazing.
It certainly is.
To involve, to have our town involved
Yeah.
would be really very nice. Okay, under new business, Jack not being here, I'm going to take the initiative to take his item under new business. This is only one item.
Mrs. Flake coming back or something? or
I think he had a
whatever is.
delay. And item A, under new business, is discussion of Academy of Penguin Hall sublease agreement for use of iron rail fields. And Peter, can I ask you to give us some background on that?
sure. So there's a summary memo in your small packet this week that I'll just walk through really quickly. So town has a 10-year lease agreement with Hamilton Wenham Youth Soccer Association for the Iron Rail athletic fields. We're in about the midpoint of that agreement. It's set to expire in 2024. So under the terms of that agreement, the Youth Soccer Association pays the town an annual fee of $5,000, and then any other organizations that use the field, the fees that are collected from those organizations for the use of the fields are passed through to the town. So Landmark School uses 2 fields in the fall and spring seasons. They pay an annual fee of $6,000 a year. That's been in place for a number of years now. They also provide in-kind services to the town, so mowing, lining the fields, and so forth. A couple years ago, the Academy at Penguin Hall opened, fall of 2016. So over the past 2 years now, the board, at the recommendation of the Iron Rail Commission, has approved 2 separate 1-year agreements with the Academy at Penguin Hall to use 1 field in the fall and spring seasons, and their annual fee is $6,000. Part of the conversation last fall, when the board approved that second 1-year agreement, was that they wanted to make sure that we were charging rates that were fair and competitive, and so they had asked the Iron Rail Commission to do a little bit of homework, and prior to a new agreement, try to pull together some comps. So late spring into the summer months, we reached out to a number of communities. A little difficult to compare apples to apples, because for the most part, well, to be honest, depending on what town and rec commission and what arrangement were in place historically, it was a little different everywhere. But generally speaking, most places actually charge on either a per person, per use, or an hourly basis, as opposed to a flat fee. But if you extrapolate out, the hourly use was around $25 to $35, depending on whether they were resident use or non-resident use. So then if you looked at the amount of time that the Academy at Penguin Hall used the field, that 1 field, the commission, when we met last month, felt that the $6,000 annual fee was appropriate, that it was competitive and fair. So that's kind of the background. And then to bring us up to current, I'd reached out to the Academy at Penguin Hall and to the Hamilton Wenham Youth Soccer Association a month or so ago, and checked in to see if they still needed the fields to the same extent that they had historically. Answer back was yes. In the course of going back and forth, we did realize that the town hadn't received payment for the first 2 years of field use, so 16, 17, 17 to 18, totaling $12,000. Academy at Penguin Hall has committed to pay the town that $12,000 that's owed by the end of this month. And also, the Youth Soccer Association had suggested that we might consider a reduced fee based on the fact that there was a little less wear and tear on the fields for the academy's use for this current year that's already started. And the Iron Rail Commission, John was there at the meeting last night, talked about that, and their recommendation coming out of it was that we maintain the same rate for this year as we have historically, but that they would be open to having a conversation about potentially amending the fee going forward, but that would have to be done well in advance of the next cycle,
Renewal.
next year.
Well in advance of
Yeah.
renewal, okay.
Yep. I think that's about all I have.
Just a couple of questions. So, the Academy at Penguin Hall has signed an agreement for this year that they're currently playing in.
They did, yep, that was the,
that's what
the
I
initial
thought.
response back was they signed it and sent it back, but then there was some conversation about changing the fee, but no specific proposal on that.
Okay. John, do you have anything before we see? I'll ask Don to come up, but let's just see, do you have anything you'd like to
Well,
say before we ask Don to come up and make a comment?
yeah, I would just comment that I understand payment of these fees are in arrears,
Yeah.
and significantly in arrears. What is the status of that?
So we have an email back from the Academy at Penguin Hall saying that they intend to pay the full amount past due between the 15th and the 30th of this month.
Of October?
October.
It's October.
Incomplete, as stated in the lease.
Yep,
Okay.
that's.
For the first 2
Thank you.
years.
That's my only question for the moment.
Okay. So Don, did you want to add to this discussion at all?
I do. So I think I ended up here tonight because, I sent Peter an email saying I think, we might want to consider adjusting this fee. I did not want this to become an event that it has become, and I think that we need to collectively sit down and talk about how we administer this lease, because I think the town, there's some ambiguity in the lease to start with, because I don't believe the town should even be involved in setting the rates. That's my take. I know Peter's shaking his head. He can do that.
We have a legal,
we went down.
I think we have a legal opinion on that one.
Yeah, I know.
We do.
Yeah, if I can get a legal opinion, I hope that's not necessary. I like to put a contract in a drawer. I know, I was there. I negotiated with 3 town administrators and many selectmen. I know what the intent is. I have all the emails. I know what the lease was supposed to be. So it's hard for me when I read it and see conflicted, I don't want to, and quite frankly, we're all on the same team, so it doesn't really matter, who's setting the rates. But from an administration perspective, you're not involved in setting the rates on any other group. You just somehow got involved in this one because it's the first one to come up since the lease renewal. You don't set the rates on Landmark or any of the other leagues that play there. We do, and we remit all fees. The town has really no skin in the game with respect to
Subletting?
maintaining the fields. So
How about subletting? We have a say in subletting, who we would allow to sublet.
You do. You have approval. You have the right to approve who we sublet to,
Okay.
not to set the rates or the terms.
Okay?
So-
I do agree with that, by the way. But I don't know why you would say no, because it's revenue. Like, I don't know what,
Well, revenue
the attorney
has-
who wrote this lease took a boilerplate real estate lease for a building and then edited it to fit a soccer field. And that's why there's a lot of conflicting information in there. But we responded to an RFP. I keep hearing that our lease runs out in 20, it's a 20-year lease with a right to cancel at 10. But the right to cancel has to go before town meeting. So the RFP clearly stated it was a 20-year lease. We went before town meeting for a 20-year renewal that was approved. So I keep hearing things miscategorized repeatedly in these documents, and it's bothersome to me. And I don't really want to make a big deal about it because I don't really want it to be an issue. But when it comes to things like this, and I have to come to a meeting to have a discussion about maybe knocking a little bit off of somebody's rate because they have a handful of players instead of a field full of players like we anticipated. I'm just trying to do the right thing, and that's...
Well, wait a minute. Who owns the fields?
The town owns the land.
Okay, if the town owns the fields, they have a right to say what happens there and how much for.
Well, you've granted us a lease with...
Correct.
Okay.
So
So we have obligations under the lease, and so do you.
Yeah.
So-
And apparently there's in arrears of payments, so
That's
that's a
right.
first and primary concern.
So, and I told Peter...
Why is it 2 years in arrears?
Well, I think because we had this happen with Landmark, when the town invoiced Landmark, and Landmark started paying the town directly, so we just assumed the town's getting their checks. Who cares whether I deliver them or... But we remedied that in the last lease renewal because it was confusing. Some checks they sent through us, some they sent directly. They're supposed to be going through us, but because we now have an agreement that's getting signed by the town, like the first year's agreement was signed by Molly and myself. It wasn't signed by the town. Then we injected the town into the approval process, which I don't believe should have happened. But I'm not angry that it did either, quite frankly. I think we're all on the same team. So that doesn't bother me. But what's bothering me is that we're really obfuscating everybody's obligations in this lease. I assumed that they were paying directly. I only found out when I saw you at Wenham Day that, I don't think that you hadn't received any payments. So I will send you a check this week, and then I will invoice Penguin Hall for what's in arrears.
Thank you.
I'm not going to make a proposal tonight, as Peter suggested, because I'd like to go before my board as well. And I'd like to suggest that, especially before those who have knowledge of this, Mr. Wilhelm, Catherine, you're on your signatures to the lease, as am I, and you were there toward the end. I was there for 4 years of negotiating prior to that. And I think Mr. Clemenzi was on the iron rail. You were there for the RFP.
I've been involved
The RFP
all
is
the way through.
referenced in the document.
I preceded both.
I understand.
Yeah.
So we had obligations under the RFP that are not referenced in the the contract would be a mess if we had to straighten it out. And I can hire attorneys to do so as well, but I am hoping that's not necessary. I'd like to sit in a room with you folks, figure out how we're going to proceed going forward.
In support of your point, I agree. I've never liked the lease as it is.
Yeah.
I
It's hard to
felt
believe
it
that took
was-
4 years.
I
and-
felt it was a very poorly designed lease.
Yep.
Okay? I deal with leases all the time. And this was not what I would have wanted. I was not on the board at the time, so I didn't have a
No, I
say in
understand.
this. But I stayed on top of it because I've managed the property for the last
Yep,
12 years.
yep.
11 years, whatever it's been. And, it's very dear to my heart, and it also is a very serious revenue generator for the town of Wenham. So we have to take it that serious. But to your point, you are a tenant there, and you need to have a lease, we need to have a lease that meets the criteria of both yourselves as tenantship and ourselves as property owners. And if there's a need to review this lease and rewrite it at renewal time, let's get ahead of it, and let's start it now or anytime soon. The conversations that lead to...
I have little interest in rewriting it after what I went through, because it was just brutal.
So that being said, we're not going to resolve what you believe and what our legal counsel believes if they're different, right? We're not. So we're either going to have to just agree to disagree and come up with some working parts that work for all of us, or we're going to have to collectively, at whatever point in time, drop a new lease that works with the people who are here now.
Is
Because-
there an avenue for us to collectively agree on how we want to view this current lease on a going-forward basis without altering it?
I think there's always an avenue for discussion, but I would say that this is our avenue for discussion. Not to say that we couldn't have a committee of people sitting together, going over page by page, but from a policy point of view, you want to sort of have a separate meeting. This is how we do our business.
Okay.
So we have to, from a policy point of view, agree, okay, we want to work with this lease and make it work so that everybody's as comfortable as they can be with it, or we want to do a new lease. We can decide whatever it is. But to spend, 20 minutes saying, well, I don't agree with this, or we don't agree with that, I, too, have been down that road, and I think we could all agree this is not a perfect lease. But it is the lease we have, and council is what we have now. And we have a very narrow issue before us tonight that I think...
Your counsel clearly acknowledged that there was ambiguity in the lease. He chose to pick the points that could be read in your favor and totally ignored everything else. And he has no knowledge that there was an RFP and lots of documentation prior to the lease being written.
If I might ask Peter, are we referring to current council or prior council?
Yeah, current town council. Okay. So, Catherine, can I just jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I think for the purposes of this discussion, trying to mete out what varying council's interpretation of the lease really doesn't get us much of anywhere. I think
No, I think
2 years ago, when we first had this conversation about the Academy at Penguin Hall subleasing some field space, I think we all knew that there were some conflicting interpretations of the lease at that time and agreed to put them aside and say all three parties are going to work together to come to some terms and conditions that everybody can agree on. That's what we've done for the past 2 years.
Yep.
For this current year, we're into October. Revisiting a fee arrangement this far along in the process is, I think, some of what the issue is on the town side. If that has merit and that needs to be discussed, it should have been done well in advance, not in the middle of when the fields are being used.
I think that's a lame argument. I mean, the check's not going to come to you until next August. There's certainly time to talk about it.
So the town doesn't get paid until after the fields have been used for a year.
That's right. We collect the money and we remit it to the town. That's what you really need to get familiar with the lease.
I'm familiar with the lease.
Okay, we collect the money from the rentals, and then we remit them to the town. So we just remitted all of the fees that we've collected for the prior year. And you should have got a check on like August 30th. I think it was dropped off.
Apparently, Ms. Martins is not familiar with the lease, though, because that's not what she said she was going to do. Unless she was talking about the past 2 years.
Well, and this is my point of contention, is that she doesn't know whether she's answering to you or to us.
Right.
And quite frankly, she's supposed to be answering to us.
And I think that's where we have a little bit of a disagreement.
Absolutely not.
Well, because,
There is a disagreement.
She
There is a
answers to the
disagreement.
lease
yeah, and
via you as a subletter
Okay.
who's
so
subletting.
Please, please take a minute and take some time and read.
believe me, I've read this, but here's where the issue
Did you-
started with
Okay.
this particular part of the lease and the subletting. We were unaware, we, the Board of Selectmen, whoever was the Board of Selectmen at the time, I know I was one of them, were unaware that the Academy of Penguin Hall was playing on the town of Wenham's fields until weeks after they started playing. So there's something wrong there, because we own that property, we had a new group using it, and we were unaware of it. That is how we got, why we started looking at that time, okay, well, what does this lease say? Can there be subleases? Who should pay who? That's how this whole thing with the Academy began. And the second year, the same thing happened. I feel like we signed this in October.
October.
And here we are the third year,
Doing the same thing again.
doing it again. So whether the lease is right or wrong, or it's yours or it's ours, this process does not work for us.
So you're getting a check from probably 5 grouped adult leagues that play there, as well as Landmark, who you don't do anything with. We collect the money and we remit it to you. My feeling was, once you approve them as a user, that we would go forward and just continue. And that's what I believe the terms of the lease dictate. So I'm just giving you my perspective.
That's fairly normal in lease subletting through a leaser.
And I would invite you, I mean, we had a meeting.
I run properties that do this.
No, I know that, but you were a bigger part of the RFP process than anybody else was. Right now, the Iron Rail Commission is not in our lease at all. We have no reason to discuss anything with the Iron Rail Commission. The town administrator is supposed to be our correspondent, and you're the executive authority that I go to.
Well, I can see where that confusion came in, because there was a prior town administrator messed this thing up.
I'm not trying to usurp them.
Messed this
I'm
up to a
just
fairly
talking
well,
about the documents.
And he bypassed the Iron Rail Commission because they were not at full membership. I was working to get that to a full membership. It is now up there where it needs to be. That's why I was at the meeting last night, to once show them continued support, even though I'm not on the board anymore. So the Iron Rail Commission does need to be included in there, but if it is not in the documentation, it's not in the documentation.
I'm just saying, I have no interface to them
I
legally.
can't speak to that because I wasn't part of the legal action.
No, I'm talking about, per the document, for me, there's no link to the Iron Rail Commission.
There's no
My
call.
only link is,
Call to you.
it's to Peter. And
So I'm the administrative authority, and the Board of Selectmen is the executive authority under the terms of the document.
that's right.
You said I was the executive authority.
No, I said the board is the executive authority. You're my administrative authority.
Back to what I said earlier, if every interaction that we have is going to be because of the document, a confrontation, I think we should change the document. And I'm not saying this moment or for this project, but I think because every conversation is a confrontation. Not your fault, not our fault. I think it might be time to look at the document and not to interpret it, because you're right, your lawyer might interpret it differently than our lawyer might, but to have 2 lawyers sit together and come up with a document that we all understand.
Right. And that's typically how a lease goes together.
But that's a longer-term issue, right? So right now, before us, because we have other things on our agenda, we have the issue of the Penguin Hall Academy.
Yep.
So
I'd like to come back, if you'll grant us, I'll come back at your next meeting after I've met with my board, because this only came up. I want to discuss this with Peter, bounce it off him, see if it made sense. And the only reason this came up is, I go by the fields. I'm not coaching this, so I don't see it, but I'm very aware that they've had, only a handful of kids playing. Really, we have leagues that drop. We have kids from Gordon that drop in that have bigger teams that are using the fields for free on a regular basis over there, which I'm required to do under the lease, by the way. But they just don't have the membership that we all anticipated. It just seems unfair that we're charging the fee that we are.
And I don't disagree with you necessarily, but where we do disagree, and where I will stand now, and whether you come back another time or another time, is that we've been through the process for this year. There have been some conversations with the Academy. There apparently have been some conversations with you. The Academy has agreed to this amount. They've been playing on the fields. They've signed it. It's done. So if we are of a mind to change and we've done some work to understand if it's a fair price, we think it is. If there's some work that needs to be done for this, based on the number of kids, or which we don't count really in anything else that I understand, we have flat fees, then we need to do it next time. That's just, where I would come down on that.
So, well, then that's fine. Then I wouldn't be here tonight, right? I have this discussion with Peter, is this something we should consider? And
and he brings it to us, as he has, and we put forward, know what John thinks about this, but we put forward our policy direction, and Peter follows through with that. So that's kind of how that works.
Yeah, I'm fine, I'm following you completely. You know,
So-
again, it does not have to be adversarial, so I
No,
wish it
yeah.
not to be also, as you said. We just need to make sure that we get on, both parties are on the same page as to how the fields are paid for, how they're used, who reports to who, and we get together later on and just have a cup of coffee and ask about the kids and so forth.
I agree. So I think we have to decide whether we want to sit and, chat more about this. I mean, we're very aware of our responsibilities under this lease. We have a fiduciary responsibility to bring revenue to the town. But we clearly, and I don't think anybody will dispute this, manage, how much field use goes on there. I mean, that's clearly in the lease. So we could reject all these things. And quite frankly, we would save a ton of money on maintenance costs if we took no other outside users.
Sure.
And we don't want to do that. I mean, we look at promoting soccer, helping everybody we can. We think we'll have a good long-term relationship with the academy. We already have a fantastic relationship with Landmark. It is getting a little tight. I mean, I have to tell you, we're very fortunate that we can even fit those folks all on the field in the afternoons over there because they need more space than we have, despite the fact that, I'm telling you, they don't use much, but they do have to fit somewhere. And right now, Landmark...
From a time management point of view.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
what do
so
they use,
the
half
private
the field?
schools, they use them right after school, right? So they're there at 3:30 till 5, and then HWISA gets on them at 5:30 till 7. And every field is in use every day. And there are game schedules to be managed for the schools, not us, we play on weekends, but, sometimes they need 2 fields to play on, and, if the other school has 2 games, that they don't all fit. So they've done very well working cooperatively together. It's a good fit. Everybody's, trying to get along well in the sandbox, and it's working out well. And so, I'm all for that. And in this, I sent that quick note in the spirit of just being fair. Like, we've got, one field that's got, 60 kids playing on it, and then, APH has got 6 or 8 kids playing on it every day. It's been this way since they started. This is a bigger number than what they had 2 years ago. It just didn't seem right, and I just thought that there was an opportunity to correct that. That's all. And, it's just in the spirit of
I
good
think
business.
what Catherine is saying, you should be ahead of the wave instead of behind the wave. And you come in the middle of the season and say, well, we want to change the guidelines or the rules now.
I just noticed, I walked over to the fields and saw them myself at the time I picked up the phone and called Peter. This is the way it should be able to work, that if we have this type of a working relationship, I should be able to pick it up and bounce an idea off of somebody without having it escalate to this. This is what I don't want to do every time there's a conversation to be had.
Well, I think, first of all, let me say, Anna, because I didn't say this at the beginning, I don't want you to leave here thinking in any way, shape, or form we don't appreciate and understand the value of not only having those fields, but having them managed by your group and all of the people that play on them. It's an amazing resource. And I don't think I hope we don't underestimate how much it takes, how much time, effort, energy, and all of those
No, I don't
things
feel that way.
that it takes. So I hope you don't feel that way. I do think, though, that we, from day one, have never really, whoever has costed out the fees, has never really costed it out by player. Is that a fair statement?
I don't think you can do it I think there has to be a minimum amount for the field, right? I mean, there's an opportunity cost there. You can't give it away for nothing. And,
Right.
and I'm not talking, we were not talking about, if we did this on a per player rate and we were comparing Landmark, and, we would be taking that rate from $6,000 to $100. It's not even apples and oranges. There's a cost to have the field.
Right.
I was just looking to give a little reduction until the numbers get up and make it even out. Just trying to be a fair businessman. That's all this was all about.
And we appreciate that. There's no question that we don't appreciate that. I don't think it's as big an issue. I think the process has happened exactly as it should happen.
Yeah.
in that you give Peter a call. He's our operations administrative person. You notice something going on where you're in charge of, and you call Peter and say, I think maybe. And he says, well, I'm operations. Let me bring it to the board and see what they think from a policy point of view. That's what we're doing. Now, all the other stuff, you know, is this the right lease? Who should be paying? Who should pay who? How? All of that is kind of separate, and I think a topic for another meeting.
Take it off.
And that's fine, and I'm happy to
Take it
do
off the
that.
table and come back.
And I can come back and, you know, and maybe you won't agree with what your predecessors did, you know, but I have a document, and I know what went into it, because I have hundreds of hours into that lease with attorneys and selectmen and, you know, 2 administrators before you. You know, so I know what the intent of the lease was. So what you read now is totally different than what the intent was. So, and I don't mind changing it. I don't mind revising it if it works for us collectively. I don't want to go, you know, I don't want to get all legal either. There's really no reason to do that. We're in this together. I just think we need to figure out how we're going to go forward. And I think it's important before you folks who have all the knowledge, you're the last bastion of any knowledge of this lease. If you guys walk out the door, it's going to be even uglier for me, you know, 3 years from now when I'm dealing with a totally new cast of
That's why
characters.
leases need-
Because I'm going to be doing this for 20 years. Probably not me, but
Well, that's
somebody
it,
else's
too.
smiling
I
face
mean,
will be up
if
here, I
some-
hope,
This is the
soon.
thing, though, is that lease has to be so clear that we all
can
are
pass from
elected,
one
we leave,
generation to
you're,
the next.
you're gonna
It
leave
should,
with
I know.
a
Somewhat
new town
seamless.
administrator.
Yeah, there can be
and
tweaks here and there, but not,
it's fortunate that we've had you involved all this time, and some of us involved all this time, but it feels like we need to do something. And maybe the place to start is to identify the areas in the lease that seem to be the most problematic. I mean, we really don't want to start from scratch. But maybe there are a couple of areas that we seem to always
I
clash
think
on.
the only ambiguity that we're really wrestling over is, you know, when we responded to an RFP and even the first paragraph of the lease is for us to manage, schedule the fields. It clearly says that we collect and remit the monies. It never says anything in the lease about you approving the rates. All of those things I know are true. So, you know, you can read what you want about the subletting. I mean, there's one paragraph in there that says that we must go before we sublet to anybody. It doesn't say anything about, you know, what happens after that. Once we get approval, I assume we have approval.
you're violating your own request. We don't want to solve it here tonight. So
No, we don't.
No, and we can't.
you made your point very clear.
Okay.
And you do need to go back to your group and say, hey, look, we've opened the conversation, now we need to.
So I need to go before my group before I
Correct.
can make a proposal to you regarding what Peter wanted me to do here tonight, because I don't want to do that without talking to my board first.
Totally fair.
Right.
But I would request that we sit down separately and maybe just tick through it and
Offline.
see if we can reach some middle ground and put it away. And if we have to make some amendments to it, we can do that as well.
Yep, absolutely.
So let me reiterate, though, what I said. Sitting down separately, those 3 words in a sentence get me a little nervous, because that's not how we do business. But if you have some operational nitty-gritty things that you would like to propose, certainly to sit down with Peter, that's the way to do it.
With regard to the lease?
Yeah, but with regard to anything, but please know that Peter's likely to bring it to us.
No, I'm okay with that. I'm saying this needs a thoughtful discussion. This is not the forum, I don't think, to review a lease.
No, it isn't.
Okay, I'm asking that we sit and do that and see if we can come to
Cool.
terms. And if we can't,
Yeah.
then we'll decide what we each have to do. But I think we can get
For the
that
lease
figured.
agreement itself, you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, just so that we're all clear, I think we said that we're going forward with the academy at Penguin Hall
Mhm.
under the present
Under the
agreement.
current status.
And that
Yep.
however it's going to be paid, the arrears will be paid up, and that we will move forward with this year as written, as signed, and with a commitment to perhaps early, I don't know what that means, springtime, coming back and looking at any changes that we might want to make, just on from a fee point of view. Because to come back, well, during the season is a difficult situation.
Well, again, I think you're assuming that's going to be a necessary step in the process. If that's a foregone conclusion, then we will. But that's the reason you haven't seen me here doing that, because I've never felt that that was part of the process. I thought once I had approval for them, it was up to us to do the rates, do the billing, remit the revenue.
I think that's something that we can discuss offline and then circle back with the board and see where we end up.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're good
Well,
for
I think
now.
didn't we agree we're all going to do that collectively, or is that something that?
The board, the 3-member board, and so they, for them to have a meeting, it has to be a publicly posted meeting, so it would essentially be.
It doesn't preclude you from sitting down with your board and coming up with some recommendations or some interpretations that you might have, or some areas that you think there are discrepancies, and sitting with Peter and understanding them and hashing them out. But please know that you won't leave that room with a decision of this is how we're going to move forward, because that's not the way town government works, whether we like it, dislike it, whatever. That's what, unfortunately, we got elected to do.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, 90% of the sitting and crunching the words happens, in Peter's office or your office or wherever on the field. But when it comes right down to the end of, okay, what's it going to be? We'll have legal counsel, we'll have to sit down and have a thoughtful conversation and let you know. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't.
You don't have to like it. At this point.
I'm less enthusiastic about that process, because I did that for 4 years, and I really don't want to engage in
Well,
doing it.
you've
There's
got,
a reason why it's the process that we have to use.
you've also got different players here now.
No, I understand.
Our intent as a board and as Peter is to make sure that that we're doing things better than we have in the past,
I know.
and create practices that will better relationships and better manage, whether it's departments, fields, or anything else. And Peter's been doing a fine job advising us as a board, and we have our discussions, as Catherine said, in public session and so forth, so the public knows what it is that we're doing, what's being recommended, what's motivating the decisions that we will vote on ultimately. So the
No,
process
I
will
do
work.
I do understand that. It's inherently inefficient for somebody who's on my side, though, because I will sit with Peter,
Yep.
and then, I'm not talking to the person who can consent to anything, so he's going to go back to you. It's, it's going to go back and forth. It's an iterative process that takes a lot longer. I know this.
Municipal government takes a lot longer than the private sector. That is a well-known fact. However, I will say, having been there at the time that we did this, there were some other factors, which we don't have to talk about now, a number of other factors that I think, on all fronts, that lengthened that process and complicated that process.
And probably
that have
frustrated you to death.
improved and or don't exist now.
Okay.
So I have no expectation that any conversation would have to last 4 years.
Okay.
Maybe 4 months, but certainly not 4 years. That was a very painful process, I would have to agree.
All right.
So,
Thank you.
all right, thank you very
Thanks for
much.
your time.
Thank you, Jackie, for checking our clock.
Yeah.
Because it's been a little confusing.
So,
Maybe some across America. Did the Boy Scouts get that? Did you know both Boy Scout troops in town?
Get the
while he's
message?
saying
Yeah.
that,
I don't know, but I will see that they do.
we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
You what?
Because we have to reconfigure, folks are going to come up
Oh, I
here.
will,
So we're going
yes,
to take a
okay.
5-minute recess and continue in our open session. Okay, come on up, guys. So this is the Wenham Board of Selectmen with a few guests reconvening after a 5-minute recess to our open meeting and old business. The old business we have before us is an annual town meeting debrief. We, after our town meeting, which seems like a very long time ago, but was in April, we identified, I say we, a group of people, interested people, identified a couple of pages of things that we might consider doing for future town meetings to improve them. And we've said for many months that we wanted to go back and look at each one of these and see if we liked these ideas, if we wanted to add to them, or there were other changes that we wanted to make. And so here we are to do that. Do we need to introduce
Probably
everyone for
introductions
the?
wouldn't be a bad idea.
Okay, so we have Diane Bucco, town clerk. This is tough on me, because I'm going to call him Dana. Alex Began, finance. I do that all the time. Trudy Reed, our town moderator, town administrator, Peter Lombardi, Selectman John Clemency, myself, Catherine Harrison, the recording secretary, Catherine Tinsley, and town council. Do you think I was going to skip over Lauren? No, town council, Lauren Goldberg. We are missing one selectman who was unable to be here tonight, so Jack Wilhelm is not here. Thank you, Lauren, and everyone else for being here for this. I don't know, it's going to be lively discussion.
Is it?
So Peter recommends that we start at the beginning, but this is not as what an idea. So you want me to just read them?
Did you think of that all by yourself, Peter?
I'll just read them.
Probably.
And we'll see where we go. So the first change that we had, I don't know that these are in priority order. I feel like this,
No, this was a
Maybe the
brainstorming session that we had with staff in the couple days after that we had lost quorum on the meeting initially, and then we circulated around, got some additional feedback from hopefully everyone involved, and so that's really what this list represents. And there is kind of some high-level, pre-town meeting, during town meeting, kind of structure to the list, but it's not in priority or rank order or anything like that. It was just really trying to put it all together.
and for clarity's sake for folks who are not sitting in this room, and I feel like Lauren should have a microphone.
We can share.
Yeah, John and I can share. The titles of these categories are potential changes, can we do this, do we want to do this, and comments. So the first one that's on here is consider adding a special town meeting as needed to keep the well, I guess I should back up a second. A few major drivers for why we even decided that we needed to come up with this list. One big one was that we had a town meeting at which we lost quorum before the end of the meeting, and then had to have a second town meeting and had a little trouble getting quorum. We postulate there were some reasons why we lost quorum. The meeting was quite long, it had a lot of articles, might have been other reasons, but it was an unusual meeting for us, and that's why we thought we should put this. So, one potential change, consider adding a special town meeting as needed to keep the annual town meeting article number at 20 or below. Can we do this? This group says yes. Do we want to do this? Two big question marks. And the comments are, the Board of Selectmen could review potential warrant articles in late August, or early September to evaluate if there is need/interest in a special town meeting.
Yeah, so probably not a special town meeting this fall.
Not this
given the
fall,
fact
but
that
this, we'll
we're-
talk about this, we'll
Go back.
consider this in general. So, should we just like quickly go around the room and get where there are question marks, and let's do that.
I'm wide
Just-
open to the format.
Well,
So I'll just jump in.
Yeah,
I
just
don't know, I don't know, I've never dealt with a fall town meeting. I don't know the last time Wenham has had a special town meeting in the
Been
fall.
many years.
Yeah, so I don't know.
It was
Actually,
two-
in
It
February,
was
wasn't it?
2013 was the last time we had a fall town meeting. There were 9 articles.
We had
Prior
one
to
in
that, there was one in 11. in '06, in '04.
We had one in February at
So
some point.
sporadic, yeah, and there was
That
one in
was
February.
Between 2010 and 2014.
2012, there was one in February. There was one in January in 2008. But generally, many towns have an annual town meeting in the spring and special town meeting in the fall. We generally
Consider them special, well, yeah, we don't have a regularly
a
scheduled.
regularly scheduled special town
And
meeting.
sometimes special town meeting is just that. Could be September, October, or February.
We have treated them historically really as special town meetings, where a lot of municipalities have a special in the fall that's regularly scheduled. Many of them deal with more zoning-related articles than anything that's come up that's financial. I'm sure Lauren has a lot more track record than I do and can speak to it, but.
But we interrupted Diane. You started
No,
to say
so
something.
I was just starting the conversation saying I don't know, and I was gonna ask if, do other towns find that that's helpful and keeps, I know that towns that have fall town meetings sometimes have multiple day annual town meetings as well, so I don't know if that's the way to go, or yes or no.
So do you have towns? What's your analysis on that?
Yeah. I think most towns do have a fall special town meeting, somewhere between mid-October and the end of November, or the first or second day in December. That is typically done, I think, to ensure that any items that require funding that there's money available for those, and that they are able to get their tax rate set. So that would be things like use of what you anticipate to be free cash to fill budget holes if they were to exist. I think Peter's right as well that oftentimes there are other types of issues that are routinely considered at a fall town meeting, such as Community Preservation Act projects, because they look at their annual town meetings in the spring and say, too much, too long, let's push that to the fall. It also is a driver to get people to those meetings. With that being said, I don't know that they necessarily act to reduce the number of issues at an annual town meeting in the spring, because they're kind of used as cleanup for this outstanding issues. I think, you're all right to be thinking about what's the culture here, and is that going to be something that is inconsistent with the culture? At the same time, I do think it can be useful as a way to deal with things that otherwise have to wait. And I know there was a lot of discussion about quorum at the previous meeting, and I know that also really has an impact on, whether a spring and fall town meeting, if there's a higher quorum requirement for a special town meeting, that can make special town meetings dicey, because you can go through the whole plan and then wind up with a higher quorum requirement and unable to meet the quorum. So those are things to kind of think about in tandem.
And our quorum requirements are now
Equal.
the same,
Yes.
120 for
120.
both special and
Specifically.
annual
Yeah.
town meeting.
Anyone else have thoughts about the,
Well, if you know you have a lot of zoning coming down the pike, I always was under the impression that zoning typically waits till the fall, when the budget and more of the money items are taken care of at the spring. So if you have a big project that's coming along or something that's gonna generate a lot of conversation, you could do a special and hold it off until the fall. Typically zoning and bylaw changes.
So we had,
I mean, nobody,
so we had 30, just as a reminder, we had 32 articles last year. That was,
or we're trying to cut it back?
Diane did a fair amount of research pulling together, kind of what our track record was historically. And annual town meeting has averaged 18 or so articles, with the high being 32 of last year and the low being 10 of 2013. When you factor in the special town meetings, we've generally averaged about 23 articles a year on any given year. So we were certainly high last year. We knew it. We had that conversation as we went through setting the warrant. Ultimately decided to keep, I think we started maybe with 36 or so went down a few, but it was still a lot of articles. It was certainly a peak. And so it's hard to say you know, I think if there were multiple years in a row where we had somewhere in the 30s, you know, maybe then it would make sense to have a conversation around a special, but maybe this year we kind of see as we go through the process. We, you know, there's another suggestion earlier on, talking about addressing warrant articles a little earlier than we have. And, you know, maybe as we go through the process this year, we can kind of see where we end up in terms of a number and then adjust from there. Because it might be, last year might have been an aberration. It certainly was since I've been here. It's generally been around 20-ish.
If you might, I've got a couple of comments. First of all, a special town meeting is supposed to be special. There's a reason for it. There's a driver for it. There's a budget problem, there's a boiler problem, there's some issue to make it special, or it's not a special town meeting. You want to make two annual town meetings, then that's, to me, a very different decision. I personally feel, and professionally feel, that we need to discipline ourselves to our annual town meeting, do our business, and call it a day. If a special event or occurrence happens, we address that appropriately. But what I've seen in the past, and I've got a few years' experience on it now, is that when there are so-called special town meetings, they become a Christmas tree. And everybody starts to hang their requests on that, and you end up with 2 full-scale town meetings. And they're a lot of work to set up. I'm sure all of you know this from your experiences. But I think if the Board of Selectmen, the town administrator, finance, and so forth, you know, discipline themselves to, okay, what do we need to accomplish to get our annual town meeting business done? And then take a look at the agenda and decide, you know, this year it was way too heavy. I know it was way too heavy. Yeah, we had that conversation numerous times, and Peter, you were, you know, one of the comments about that, and I fully agree. I think we took on more than we should have. If you want to get attendance, you've got to do your business and let people go. The attention span in today's social world is not as good as it used to be, and town meeting was a reason to get together again as a town. Today, people have families, and families have all kinds of events going on, and so that's my 2 cents.
Alex, I think you were going to say something.
Well, I don't have any really strong opinions about it because I don't have any experience with the special town meeting. But I mean, that tends to make sense, John, what you said, that they should be for a particular kind of purpose that might be specific to a given year and the challenges that things that we need to address in any given year that don't persist. But if the structure of what we needed to do, like of our town meeting and what we look to accomplish kind of trends in that direction, and we should consider a second, whether it's whatever you call a second annual town meeting, or like Hamilton just had one. Do they have one every year?
They often,
Yes.
they usually
Yeah,
have a
typically do.
special town meeting in the
So
fall.
if it comes down to like, well, the nature of our town's business and affairs is such that it does lend itself to a second setup, and we should like plan for it over the course of, for the long term and over the course of a couple of years, rather than just an occasional, hey, we got a lot on our plate, let's defray or defer some of the items to the fall. Like the zoning stuff that we had before us in April was, of course, you know, very interesting to many, the marijuana zoning bylaws, right? I think there was a time crunch too for us to get those addressed anyway, so maybe we wouldn't have moved those as you might other zoning bylaws to a fall meeting. So I think it's sort of like it doesn't boil down to the number, right? Because we could have 20 or 30, it's the content and the nature of the articles. So it's hard to, because they could take an hour for one, or you can fly through 5 and 10 minutes maybe. But yeah, so I guess I would look to those who kind of are seeing the article, the nature of the articles and the quantity of them coming kind of down the pike that are related to zoning or other kind of broad policy measures, to think like, yeah, we might want to start considering it. For the next few years, we're going to have a lot on our plate rather than just 1 year. Because I couldn't make a call at any point in time, be it August, September, or, you know, when it isn't too late to say whether or not we'd need one.
So I have a couple of strong feelings about this. that might surprise people. One of them is, as our neighbors do, and as Lauren pointed out, I think that it is our culture, and a good culture in town, to come together, as we do in the spring, April, whatever, May, and consider the budget, and consider it as the budget, not with a, well, we'll put in this number, but we might change it later, we might have to add to it later. I think people should be able to make all of the financial decisions that we know about at one time, in one place, in one meeting. So, to me, the notion of having, which to my knowledge we never have done, but the notion of having a special town meeting in the fall to go back and fill the holes, things that we really didn't get to, or we didn't do well, or whatever in the spring, doesn't appeal to me. And the other thing is, I think we need to decide this on a year or 2 year basis rather than standardize it. Because really, most years, we can complete our business in one Saturday or whatever day it is in the spring, and be done with it. Anything that's financial, including CPC expenditures, I think in this town, my experience would be that it would create some issues if we, with this one bank of money that we have, made decisions in the spring and then took a whole new set of applications and made decisions in the fall about how we were going to spend this divided pot of CPC funds. So I'm not a fan of standardized special town meetings every year, although I think we would probably know early enough that if we had a situation where we anticipated this meeting is going to go too long, that we could make arrangements for that year to move some of those things.
So that's correct.
Zoning kinds of things, bylaws kinds of things, non-financial things to a fall town meeting. But
Can I make a comment?
please.
I think if we've all had a chance to look at this document, there's several things on here that if we try to put into practice, we can shorten the meeting, whether there's 20 articles or 35 articles. So I think that's what we need to concentrate on, is how we can change our process to get the meeting going, presentations, things like that. And I also think it might increase interest if they know they're not going to have to come and sit for an hour just to listen to presenters before the meeting even gets started. So I think those are some of the things we need to be focusing on.
And that was where this one obviously was kind of a higher level policy discussion. A lot of the other things on this list are more operational
right.
and easier to talk through and
Right.
agree on. I think this was one of only 5 or 6 items that had the question mark of, do we want to do this? Because it's, a lot of the other ones just are more straightforward.
Right.
And I think so there's 2 pieces of it. I completely agree with Trudy. No matter how many articles we have, we need to do what we can to make it as efficient and as short as possible. But I think there's, we've kind of evolved into a tone of town meeting that is not quite as welcoming, and this isn't just in one year, I've seen this over a number of years, not quite as welcoming and open as other town meetings have been. So it's a balance of getting the work done, having people receive information, because we all know that sometimes people come to town meeting with no information. So either we have to get it to them and make sure they have it beforehand, or give them a little time. And then also make it a place that they're interested to stay for 3 or 4 hours, because the stuff is interesting. Get them there. And a few of these, as I look through them, speak to start doing things sooner. And I think that's us, that's start looking at warrant articles sooner, and start, everybody getting familiar.
I particularly enjoyed the comment that said, rent or purchase cheap seat cushions.
That's coming.
Now,
Yeah.
that's a positive and a negative. The negative is, if they're in uncomfortable seats, they're gonna want to see this project move along quickly.
Oh, I don't think there's a risk of them being too
But-
comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, it is still an auditorium on a Saturday in spring.
Sat in those seats numerous times over the many years. Not a bad idea.
So I think the second one might be a little quicker, to Peter's point, begin discussion of potential warrant articles with the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board in December. I don't know if December's the right month, but earlier than we have, and can we do this? Yes. Do we want to do this? The comment is that we didn't start this until January this year, which led to longer meetings, more meetings, and less time to make decisions and changes. So I guess this goes into the prep.
Yeah. And that was something, since I've been here, generally the selectmen have opened the warrant and then started a discussion about potential articles to add. And I'd suggest if we have articles that we know are teed up, I think we should start having those conversations. Not kind of one-off, I think we should try to group them together as much as we can. But, you know, I think we'd initially put down December. I'd suggest, you know, even in November, if they're ready, I don't think there's anything wrong with having some discussion about it, come to a consensus, and then put it on the list, and we don't then have to revisit it in as much depth once we, you know, as we're going through the warrant building process.
Other comments on that?
And we can do that before we officially open the warrant, or do you just officially open the warrant earlier?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Go for it.
And I think if you don't mind, I think there are some that are just standard articles that you have from year to year, no matter what, and those certainly, you know, you could get teed up because you know they're going to be on there. And you could have a discussion about them at any time, and the decision could be made that as soon as the warrant's open, they just get put on there. So I think there's obviously some that are much more difficult, like the budget, that require a different level of engagement as compared to those that are just standard and routine.
I think that's what was hard, you know, especially this past year where the budget was a moving target, you know, right up until the end. We weren't sure where we were going to end up with operating override
Right.
and so forth. That didn't leave a lot of breathing room to really dig into all of the other articles, and there were a lot of them. So, but I think that was last year in particular. That was one of the issues that we ran into.
I felt at a little disadvantage this past year, particularly with those articles that were with the planning board. I think they had their hearing very, very late. And I felt, not that any one of us has to be an expert in everything, but I felt like I would have been more comfortable if I had a little bit more working knowledge of more of them. I won't say all of them. And with things happening so late and it being there being complicated issues, you know, in the end, one person gets assigned to answer questions about that issue, and that's hard.
How long is the warrant typically open?
So it's about 2 months, start to
2 months?
finish. Beginning of January to beginning of March, give or take a couple days on either side.
Maybe shorten the length of the time that the warrant's open. I don't know.
I think this year, because the entire law around marijuana was so unsettled that, and I know it felt really rushed at the end, but I think in some ways there was a benefit to not, you know, kind of tying down exactly what the answers were going to be really early about the marijuana bylaws. You know, that is not typically the way that zoning bylaws kind of make their way through. And I think, you know, as the law in that area gets more settled, I think if we'd had the flexibility of just waiting and sitting on it, I think it would have felt different if it came up this year. We have a lot better picture. But there was real concern that taking no action would leave the town in an exposed situation. So I completely agree with you. I mean, I think, you know, the earlier in the process, the better in terms of having some level of certainty. I think this past year was just a really tough year for that. And people's interest, I mean, people are always interested in zoning, there's no question. But I think in light of the nature of those amendments, people were interested in a way that maybe, you know, with regular zoning amendments, people just aren't. And so it just made the process feel a lot more intense.
Yeah, I didn't time that particular one, but that took an absorbent amount of time.
Yeah.
And if you pull that piece out, how would it have affected the bigger picture?
That's right.
I think it was 47 minutes.
Not that he was counting.
There you go.
And wasn't
Probably
that
a third,
Coupled with the difficult budget that was one, there was no way to, right, so.
Timeframe.
Yeah,
And wasn't that what ended our first meeting?
Right.
Correct, that's right. Yep.
yeah.
Public comments were largely, or at least, if not largely, somewhat misdirected because of the confusing, the complexity of the zoning bylaws themselves. And so we recall it started getting into medicinal and all this other, went down this path that was just, led to it being nearly an hour. But in,
That
like, in most
conversation
zoning
probably
isn't
needed to
that,
be better controlled, I guess.
certainly, yeah. And most zoning isn't that interesting, right?
Right, it's not. Although I will tell you that this town was not by far the longest discussion I listened to
It's
on
all
marijuana
relative.
zoning
Yes.
bylaws. I think, again, I think part of the issue was this wasn't just one single thing, okay, let's change this piece, let's make this setback X feet, which, you know, even if people read that, they can read it and understand, and that's that. I was joking today with a town administrator from another town that, you know, if it took a law firm of 40 attorneys, you know, 6 months to be able to understand a complicated law and still be struggling with, you know, what its provisions mean, how can the legislature, how can, you know, the legislature of the town, which has much less time, much less opportunity for diving into that, be expected to grasp all of the nuances? So I think, you know, it occurs to me that one of the ways to deal with a situation like that for the future is to maybe think of having what some towns call a mini town meeting, which isn't just the warrant hearing. It's actually an opportunity for those with the most knowledge to kind of sit at a table and just answer all the questions. Go through, this is why this word says this, and this is why we did this with this provision, and this is the concept behind zoning, and really, you know, try to go into it in depth. And I know you guys had me come out. I know you had the warrant hearing on separate dates. We talked about the different ways of regulating
On that
marijuana.
subject alone.
Exactly.
I said to Peter, I said, you know, I have had enough of this subject. I don't want to hear from Warren again.
Ever again. I think, I think that subject was just very dense. But I think, too, to maybe try and take something out of it for the positive, which is zoning can be really complicated. And so if there's a very complicated zoning bylaw amendment or regular bylaw amendment that's going to require answers, that, you know, maybe there's a time set up just for that, where people can come in, you do kind of the mini town meeting. I'm thinking in Dedham, which has a representative town meeting, it's obviously a much
That's
bigger.
why we have a warrant hearing.
It's true, and they have
That's
similar.
where people should be seeking questions, or putting questions out and seeking answers.
The interesting thing about the way that this meeting goes, though, is it's not the Board of Selectmen's meeting at this
True.
mini meeting. The one I'm talking about that they do in
Oh,
Dedham.
okay.
It's really the legislative body. They have a representative town meeting, so it's a different concept. But the outcome of it is quite interesting because it's not the people who put the warrant together who are, and it's much more the department heads and the people who will be implementing or enforcing, and it's a different atmosphere. So I'm not saying that the warrant hearing isn't important or that it shouldn't happen. I think it should. I'm just suggesting maybe in the case of a very complicated bylaw that's, you know, pages and pages and pages, it may make sense in a less, you know, structured format to.
Like a form.
Yeah, like a form to go
Right.
through all of the background and why the town is recommending this and why it's being presented at this time and that stuff. And maybe that will help shorten the town meeting discussion because people will have had the opportunity for more information. And again, I know you provided lots of opportunity. I'm not suggesting otherwise.
And that's very similar to what we ended up doing for the budget this year, because we knew the budget was gonna be complicated. We didn't want the confusion on the floor of town meeting. And we recognized that just doing it as part of the standard warrant hearing wasn't necessarily enough. So that was why we organized that separate forum, and Alex, you know, walked through, you know, in a lot more detail than we would at town meeting, you know, how we went through our budget process, where we ended up and why. And so I think, again, you know, you look at last year and say it was a little unique in that we had a very complicated for the first time in quite a while budget process. And then on top of that, had the marijuana issue at the same time.
I think that kind of a forum, to your point, and to the budget, makes a lot of sense. It has another advantage, I think, of maybe teasing out some of the important questions that people may have later. I know at the town meeting, there were a lot of questions about marijuana and how much money is going to be brought in, and I think many of us knew that what they were saying wasn't true, but didn't really know what the real number was. The difficulty, as always with that, is if you have a couple of those, a budget one and a marijuana one, or whatever our one this year would be, can we get people out?
Right.
Enough people out to make it worth the effort and time it would take for the people who are putting it together.
Yeah.
Well, especially where the planning board statutorily has to have their public hearing process for any zoning amendments. They had already done that for marijuana. So it does, there's the balance of trying to get out ahead of it and oversaturation.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the benefits perhaps is any materials that are prepared, let's just even say for the planning board's public hearing on a particular zoning amendment, can be posted to your website, which in the past that wasn't really an option. So that's whether it's a PowerPoint or whether it's FAQs or whatever it is, and maybe trying to make some of that content available intentionally, and seeing are people asking questions, are you getting people calling in response to an FAQ, and I'm thinking that question about, well, how much money would there be in this marijuana, if the town knew those were the types of questions that were going to be asked, then maybe an FAQ ahead of time would have sidestepped some of the drama at town meeting.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a balance. It's a balance of how much time and effort does the town put into educating, how many people take advantage of that. And maybe it's not necessarily an additional form, but maybe it's taking the questions that are asked at the warrant hearing or that are asked at the budget hearing or at the planning board public hearing and trying to, summarize that so that other people have an opportunity to review that as well. Posting it on the website.
Anything else we want to talk about on that one?
We've done 2 out of the 25.
Yeah. To get a little more meaty, interesting, whatever. Make sure that the annual reports are delivered by the weekend before ATM, so residents have all the materials prior to the warrant hearing
That
and
was
is
a problem.
reminded of ATM date. Yes, yes.
Well, they normally are. I think there was
Yes.
a glitch, so
This year
that
was
has
a
never been an
problem.
issue.
That's right.
So the one thing I'll add to that, it was an aberration. We had the weather issue, which led to delays from the printing company that we were using. Don't anticipate that happening again next year going forward. But in the context of that, one of the questions that came up was whether we should, and I know it's come up before, and I know some of this is a little third rail stuff, but I think it's worth having a conversation, whether it's worth delivering hard copies of the annual town report to every resident. The warrant book is one thing, annual town report is something else. That cost-wise is up on the order of $7,500
$8,000 easy.
or $8,000 for the hard copies of the color copy bound annual town report. I don't know how many residents.
It's always been delivered, was it not this past year?
No, it would be. I'm questioning going forward if it's worth the
I see.
the
Okay.
money
All
more
right.
than
I see.
and not that we wouldn't produce annual report and not that we wouldn't have hard copies and have it available electronically. It's just
This is your board of directors meeting. What do you owe your board of directors when they have their meeting to make the decisions they're gonna make for that year?
I'm not disagreeing.
On the annual
I'm
report?
just responding to the comment. I understand where you're coming from.
I think yeah.
I know many towns that do not. They make it available at their library, they put it on the website. It's different places throughout town.
I know one town that does,
That's
other
us.
than this town.
Okay.
And that's
I
because
know
they
one
put the
town, so
warrant
maybe we
in
know
the
two.
report.
I know one year that we didn't. and that didn't work out very well.
Right, so I understand the
But-
precedent, the history, all of that.
So
I'm not-
I'm going to just suggest on that one that that's a really good question for our citizen survey, citizen engagement survey.
So let's put it on there and go back to the other thing and say whether is gonna be a problem and can be a problem. So, rather than schedule the delivery for the weekend before, I would schedule the delivery 2 weeks before. Just going forward, weather is a problem and can be a problem. We don't necessarily get it printed locally anymore. So it's a
Easier-
crunch.
Easier said than done. Oh, well,
It is, but if
well,
everything's
you-
starting earlier,
Yeah, I understand.
do you know what I mean?
Hypothetically. But the warrant has to close,
It's guided by the closing of the warrant.
Which is guided by
Well,
you.
move the closing of the warrant. You don't need to open it for 2 months. There's one community I recently met, I can't remember which one, they closed their warrant like in January or February, and it's done.
A lot of towns that close the warrant earlier have a special town meeting on the same night as the annual town meeting, and anything that doesn't make it into the annual that's important is dealt with in the special. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have more time. So, that's something to think about. It means the process for the annual starts earlier and ends earlier, but then there's a whole special process
It
because,
does not need to be delivered.
in theory, I'm just
but
pointing
then
out.
that's, talk
That's a whole
about
nother
not being
nightmare for the day
transparent.
of.
Yeah, so,
For certain people.
so Jackie looks like she's going to have a heart attack back there. And if you have a comment, please come to the podium.
Sorry.
Since Jackie is very involved with the annual report, we might as well hear her.
She just
Yes.
wants to win the award.
She just wants to win the award. Well, she's going to have it.
The award is one thing because it is, that is important to me because it sets a standard for best practices as a communication tool. Because I think at the very end of the day, that's what this is. However, this year I had a much more unique experience than I've had the past few years because we got to a point where the weather issue happened and I was hand delivering the reports. And I think that opened my eyes to something in regards to the issue of them being hand delivered to everyone in the community, and that I delivered a lot of streets personally this year and then drove by later days and they were still sitting next to mailboxes on front porches. So I think the issue with the form of communication is that we are producing a much better report than we used to in terms of the department heads providing information and our charts and our graphs being in color. It's a really useful tool. But I don't know that enough people are actually picking it up and bringing it inside. And to me, is it worth, it's a great deal that the Boy Scouts are doing it. It's a huge public service, but it's not directly in somebody's mailbox. It can't be put in somebody's mailbox. And I wonder if that's the best use of our time and resources. I also would say, too, I think that to me, it's important that it looks professional and that we have a little bit of time to make it look professional. And I will say that I've built in a private cushion for myself the past couple of years of about 2 days of when I've told everyone the due date versus when we've actually had to get it to the printer.
No.
And now you know, so please don't abuse it. But I think it is important that we do hear feedback day of, and maybe it's just more directed at me because a lot of folks know that I do the document and do the formatting, but I think I do get a lot of feedback on whether or not it looks professional and whether it's accurate. And so I think that I know the time of proofreading is really important. I think if we're going to expend the resources and cost of producing the document, whether it's on the web or in person, it should be good and it should be right, and we should look for those errors. I think it represents a really important conversation in the town and a big decision. I just think, to me, taking the time to make sure between the warrant being closed and the printing that what we're sending to the printer is the best that we can send in terms of content, and that the zoning articles are laid out appropriately, the budget's laid out appropriately. I think that's time spent that I don't want to lose in an effort to make other moments more efficient. I think we'll lose efficiency if that document isn't to the standard where folks expect it to be.
No one's questioning the professionalism of the book. I think what we need to look at is the distribution.
Yeah, I
People
agree.
want it
And
bad
the
enough,
timeline.
they will go pick it up.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on Diane's point, though, I think want to make clear what the potential change is, and it's really not a change. It's getting back to what we've always done historically. It was that it's been delivered the weekend before annual town meeting. We don't, at the start of the process, plan on the books being delivered on that Thursday or Friday. We plan on them being delivered a full, at least the Monday before, if not the Friday before. It just got backed up more than a week beyond that this year with the weather.
Exactly, because they had a storm
It was
where
a
everyone was
domino
doing it, right,
effect.
and then we had a storm as well.
Yeah, so I guess to your point, if
My
we,
point of view is, my point is that the weather is changing, and it doesn't look like it's going back to be normal and mild winters anymore, and I just think that we need to, I don't
We'd build
know.
in a little more.
I would build in a little bit more cushion.
So to do what.
And I think
what-
that's what Jackie's saying too, is
Yeah, I don't want to lose the printing cushion or the editing
Right,
cushion,
right.
because I
Right, I
think
don't wanna
there's
take
the
anything away.
time it goes away to the printer and has to be shipped back, you know, and we're looking at printers all the time to find the right people. I'm already looking for this time of year, like to start having that, I'm already thinking about that book right now, but I think it's figuring out the right timing of when the board wants to close everything down and say, nope, we're done making changes, and having that cushion there. I think the last couple of years, to me at least, I'm kind of in that pressure point. I live here for those couple of days, and I think we have been getting closer and closer to town meeting before we've finished prepping business, and I think that's challenging.
So in order to maintain the quality of the book and the time to edit it and prepare it, would require the warrant to close sooner, for things to be finalized sooner.
Or
To
a
allow
closer
you
printer.
the same amount of time, but to allow it to come sooner, arrive sooner.
Yep. And I think too, something that we also want to think about too is that we also don't, sometimes there's a little bit of flexibility because we don't deliver them ourselves, not the printer to us, but us to the public. And we also want to be considerate of, we don't usually get to choose the weekend that the Boy Scouts do their deliveries, because that's something that's planned months in advance on their end. So we may be able to reach out to them and adjust the weekend that we deliver, but we're getting a great service, and I physically now I can say I've done it with them, and taken
Cost of mailing would be.
the cost of mailing, but
Very high.
I just mean that we want to know the timing with the Boy Scouts as
Right.
early as possible.
I didn't mean to change that, just to get everything, to plan for sooner.
Right.
Yeah,
Right,
agreed.
you know.
Exactly.
And so you could do a local printer.
so they were in Massachusetts.
They were I thought they were farther away.
They were in
No,
Massachusetts.
they weren't that
so-
far. It was,
Yeah,
they
you
were
couldn't
coming.
get from
Yeah.
A to
Maybe we
B.
need somebody in California.
Right.
yeah, Hawaii, and I'll go directly to consult.
Yeah, such
That'd be great.
such a trooper.
Assist
So
the
I
printers.
think the one takeaway that I had is, we do our budget schedule every year. We've got a draft out there now. We can certainly sit down and go through and try to back into building in a little more cushion in March to finalize the report, and maybe that means closing the warrant a week earlier than we have in the past few years.
So the culture, not to say that we need to keep it this way, but the culture around keeping the warrant open as long as we have is partly, I could sing it, but I won't, tradition, but partly because there's always been the desire for people who might want to put in a citizen's petition to have the most amount of time to do that.
So they only need 10 signatures. They can put in a placeholder if they know that one's coming. But if they know your deadline, they'll get the petition in. That, you shouldn't base your closing of the warrant on citizens' petitions.
In many towns, the citizens petition final date is a few days before the Board of Selectmen's final date.
Which would be a
yeah.
right thing to do.
Yeah, and so it's for a planning purpose, and as long as I think you clarify that that's the reason.
We can announce that.
And the board always retains the ability to put something in the warrant, even if it's established a deadline for others. So if something came along that, was really important and time sensitive, the board would still have some flexibility. The one thing during this discussion that I just want to remind people about is part of the problem is figuring out local aid. And I do think that's, with the budget, you don't necessarily have a good picture. The earlier you kind of shut down the discussion on the budget, the less likely the final numbers are to match, which is one of the reasons why those fall special town meetings sometimes happen, because towns count on a certain amount. So I know, obviously Peter has a lot of experience with this and budgets conservatively for that purpose, but it, backing up the schedule, if the governor's budget comes out very, very late, you guys may be in a spot where you really are doing your best to estimate, using educated ideas and guesses about what those numbers will be. But, it's not, right, it's not an ideal, the whole process isn't ideal because it isn't just dependent on the town's local receipts.
Right, and I think it's fair to say that, we obviously have one of the earlier annual town
You definitely
meetings
do.
on the schedule statewide, so that puts us at a disadvantage relative to, projecting out
Yeah.
our state aid, and that's why we always project conservatively. And, on the order of magnitude, on a $19 million budget, it's $200,000 net of state aid, so it's even up or down, it's a few $1,000s, and hopefully we've got some level of cushion of those $5,000 or $10,000 in our local receipts to be able to accommodate, if it comes in lower than what we had projected.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you can also write your warrant articles, and, Peter and I have talked about this before. You can try to write them more broadly if you close the warrant earlier so that you have more flexibility. We talked about, are you going to put that actual number in the warrant? Are you going to say a sum of money? And that's cultural as well. Different communities.
And my answer back has been, yes, because that's the tradition.
That's
we
right.
want as much specificity as
Yes.
possible.
And I guess
that's
I'd call it specificity, but I'd call it transparency too.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that's what that's all about. I think it's a bigger issue. The state aid is a bigger issue for the school number.
Yeah.
But usually, by the time we get around to it, we have a pretty decent idea of what the state is.
Yeah.
But at most, we could only close the warrant like a week earlier than we have historically. Really, just given the fact that we normally have our joint FinCom meeting for our shared programs with Hamilton that second week of February, and the school committee is finalizing their budget at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
You can't.
Right. I'm wondering, to the point of not delivering, that some people don't pick them up or whatever, I wonder if there's a way to identify people that would like to opt out of receiving one.
Just just request whether or not, reach out to residents.
So we
I don't know,
could
what's a mailing
talk
to
a little
residents?
later
Okay.
about a mailing.
Yeah.
We did the Get Out the Vote mailing before our second session.
Right.
That was fairly well received, relatively short money. Maybe when we send out if everybody agrees we should send out one of these before our town meeting, maybe that's something that we say, either send us a note, give an email address for people who want to opt out.
Yeah, because it's true.
Because there might be people who say,
There are, right.
it just goes in the recycling bin.
Oh, there certainly will be, right. It'll,
Couldn't you opt in? Maybe better to
Or opt in, I'm always struck
Sorry.
by
Yes, except
is,
for.
well, what I'm always struck, well, not just tradition, but what I'm always struck by is the demographic of the people
should opt in.
who who would be happy to read it online is not necessarily the demographic of the people that are sitting in those really uncomfortable chairs on the day of town meeting.
Without the cushion.
So, without the cushions. So we have to be, I think, sensitive to the needs of all of the people, particularly the ones that are taking the time to come out and vote. And we don't always know that. So I think we can't rely on tradition as years and years change, but we should make an effort to find out. So opt in, opt out, mailing, whatever. Okay. Wow, we're moving right along.
So 3.
So, deliver ATM script by Friday before warrant hearing, so everyone is comfortable with material well in advance. Do we want to? Yes. Make warrant article assignments to BOS, FinCom, planning board members in February so they understand issues and take ownership. I have some thoughts on that, but I'll wait. Anyone want to speak to why that's on there, or how, or what?
So the ATM script comes out of my office, at least it has since I've been here. There's been obviously some transition in the moderator position, which is why, although
It's
it was.
greatly appreciated.
Yeah. So Paul had his script that he wrote
Right.
himself.
moderator council.
Right, exactly. We can get a
Council.
little bit more into, how much the moderator speaks to the different articles and introductions. That's another item further down, but just kind of high level, that now comes out of my office and has, I think, all 3 years now, basically been wrapped up in the closing moments leading up to town meeting, quite honestly, maybe a day or 2 or 3 before. And so I think, so that everybody, moderator particularly, but really everybody who's involved, having a full week of that script makes sense. It's gonna be, a little more work earlier on, but I think would make for a better process in terms of everybody being comfortable with the material.
I don't know if this is where it's added, but I heard from several people of the audience that there were 3 different pieces of information that people were looking at. What was on the screen, what was on the chair, and what was in the book.
It's on the list.
Okay, sorry.
That's a
We
very
got
good
it.
point.
Okay.
Typically, and I think, because of the person that the former moderator is, that he was doing a lot of the presentation because, he was in a spot to do that. That is not the norm. Most towns, the moderator will, look immediately to the person making the motion to do the work of the presentation. And then that's it. That's all the moderator does. There's more dicey responsibilities as it goes along in terms of moderating the actual discussion. But the introduction and the substance, and I know that's kind of in a separate thing, but it also, to me, directly relates. Because obviously the script is the administrator's effort to streamline the process. But, I do think it makes it lengthier because the people who then need to give information, explain, and make explanations, it kind of comes after or separate. So to me, your script is already great. It covers everything. But if you switch who does the presentation part, then it leaves the moderator just moderating, and it leaves the bulkier lifting to the people with the actual responsibility for the content.
And that was the top item on the second page.
Sorry.
Was to do exactly
I know
that.
it's here, but
Yeah,
I
and
just,
think-
they do seem related to me.
Yeah, they do, and it bears, I think, a little more discussion too, because my impression of the meetings is that they're becoming too scripted. And I think that's exactly to this point, because we're relying on our moderator to be the moderator, the expert, everything. And so we're trying to put all of that in a script for one person. And I think that, to everyone's point, if we scripted that would be that royal we that you and I talk about. If we scripted the moderator part, and perhaps the presenter's part too, but those are separate things, then it wouldn't feel so artificial. Like everything has to be read from the script and by one person. So
I see the script should be an outline so that everybody knows what should be said. It's nice to have it all written and whatever, but sometimes it doesn't sound like the person speaking.
And I think that depends on the people, whoever's going to be presenting on the
Right.
articles
So I
now.
think we're all going the same route.
Somebody might stick to the script and feel most comfortable with that.
Right,
Somebody
or
else
if
might
they're
just-
familiar with
A
it,
bit more.
they could say more, yeah.
I also think if it goes back to the Board of Selectmen or FinCom or planning to do their motion or their script, it's also an opportunity for them to give their recommendation or give the board's recommendation.
agree.
And I think if
Right.
that's done up front, it may eliminate some of the questions from the audience.
I think it absolutely should be done,
And I think it should just
yeah.
automatically, in Linfield, they just automatically go to that board. And it doesn't mean that the whole Board of Selectmen has to make their comment or recommendation, just one comment that's very brief. Recommended or not, brief description, and see if that can help eliminate some of the questions.
It might eliminate some of the questions, and in a good way, it might stimulate some
Well, it
questions.
might. But if
I mean,
it's
this year, I thought we had a
stimulating good
lack of
questions,
good
but-
questions, but you're right, I
Right.
completely agree.
But I think a lot of
Should be
times
done
I've
right up
seen,
front.
we
It's
don't
in the
know.
warrant book,
I
but
mean, if
people
it's
don't necessarily-
right, and
We
if
tend to open it as a conversation.
But
as
there are
opposed to-
sometimes in the warrant book, it says, we'll give recommendation at town meeting. Well, if it's given right up front, now the audience knows how that board feels and can make or break a vote, but
I agree.
And that was in that same.
When we get to that.
Yep.
Maybe we just dealt with two of them.
Yeah, we'll just
Can we cross off two? Sounds good
Let's
to
cross
me.
off two, it'd make everyone feel good, yeah.
Everybody in agreement?
Okay, I do think, though, that having whatever script it is, the earlier that we can get any of this material that we need to use to prepare for the meeting, the better. That's easier said than done, but makes a lot of sense. Post Board of Selectmen / FinCom ATM, post, I see, thought that meant after. Post the BOS FinCom ATM prep meeting for 11:30 a.m. to allow ample time.
It used to be 11:45. It's been 11:45 in the past, right?
No, it's been
No, it's been
12,
like 12 or
15,
12:30.
12:30.
Oh, all right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it's,
Very
yeah,
rushed.
it's very rushed, and it, then there's the balance of going out and trying to socialize
Right.
and just
Right.
be prepared, and a lot going on, so my thought was just,
Well, there seems to have been a line there, trying to get through.
That's the next, that's
That's-
down.
yeah, that's
that's,
coming
yeah,
too.
it's a little further down.
And we had some, I don't remember what it was, but there was some confusion about something with the FinCom
In the late minutes.
in the late minutes, that if we'd had a little more time, we probably could have cleared it up and it might have made things a little smoother
Right,
later.
right. Well, we also had recommendations coming down to it where we all were meeting anyway beforehand, so that
Right.
took the allotted time and then some. that we-
Thought is 11:30, if it's a half hour, great, then gives you a chance to eat and
Well, it doesn't
catch your
really
breath.
give you a chance. That's what I was just thinking now. So that would be less time to schmooze with the luncheon people.
There's nothing that says you couldn't start earlier. I mean, you could post that meeting for whatever, depending on how much there is.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
if there's nothing left to resolve, then at the beginning of the week, Peter posts the meeting for the board at 11:30, and Alex posts a meeting at 11:30. If there's, or 11:45, or whatever it is, if there's a lot, then maybe you say, you know what, we should come in at 11. We'll get that out of the way, and then 11:45 or 12, there's still time to socialize and eat and all that.
I guess the idea was to do it, before the lunch,
Right. Yeah.
as opposed to during or right after,
Right,
because then it just got really tight, because then you're up against, then it's, 5 minutes of one, and,
That's right, it's very compressed at that point.
right.
Yeah.
And you're rushing out
Everybody's
to get
antsy
your
to get out
voting
there,
card.
and we've got a show to put on.
Smart.
But it's if they get out at 12:30 and they try to get to the line and talk and eat and then back in at 1, you're again all in that rush.
Yep.
So even if you go a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
It
You
doesn't,
don't want to miss that
optics-
free luncheon.
no, tradition. And the optics aren't good of that either. If the people who are sitting at the front of the room are scrambling around in the last 5 minutes trying to find their seats and get their papers together, that's not really the best.
So we'll just say before lunch,
Before lunch.
I like it.
not 11:30.
Okay.
Perfect.
So the next one is to include the moderator in Board of Selectmen FinCom ATM meeting, prep meetings. Yes, yes.
Duly noted, move on.
Okay.
And it's what we've done historically, it's just more of a reminder.
Yeah. And I honestly think there were more meetings that I should probably have attended.
Oh, I just meant the one the day of the
Oh, the 11 a.m.
that
Oh, I
that
thought the
meeting.
moderator, I
Yeah,
would
that-
like to start attending more meetings leading
I
up.
think that's a good
That's
idea.
That
further
was-
down,
that-
too.
That was further down.
Yeah, we covered that one. so
Oh,
we're done.
okay, we already covered that one. Okay, good, we can cross that one
Now,
out.
we might want to reiterate
Hey,
that.
Judy.
So open up,
Page.
so this is an interesting question, I think. Open up voter registration before 12:30. And this says, yes, planned 12 o'clock start time at latest next year. Do we typically open up at 12:30 for our 1 o'clock meeting? I thought we always opened up at 12.
I don't know.
I worked the elections town meetings for 20 years in
Yeah.
this town. We always started at about 11:30 because everybody likes to come for
Come in.
lunch early. They want to get their
Yeah.
voter card, they want to go to lunch.
Yeah.
And as soon as they come out of lunch, they want to go find a seat.
Right.
So I personally would like to see 11:30.
Okay.
Does that create a problem
Nope.
for you?
I
would-
mean,
I would
anybody
agree with
that's
that.
working the check-in can go and grab their lunch quick and come back and still enjoy it at the table.
Right.
But I think
No food at the table, though.
Well, and
Yeah. You know, and we make,
They'll take shifts.
we make a
Yeah.
little fun of
we'll
this
have
luncheon.
3 people, and then they can
You
take
know,
a
we
shift.
call
further
it
down.
silly and it's
Yeah.
old-fashioned, it's tradition, but it really is one of those things to me that brings us together and allows the
As a
town
town.
meeting to be a little more interesting and a little more social, and people want to come. So it is an important part of what we do, I think. Okay.
Okay.
Check in by last name versus by address. How many times have you heard that? Is that statutory?
No,
No?
not for town
You
meetings.
can print it out either way, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
How would that expedite things greatly? I'm just curious.
Can I,
Address, it takes a little while to go to the
Typically-
page.
I know there was just some conversation that I heard about it.
typically, when you go somewhere to check in,
Yeah.
what do? You give your last name.
Unless it's for voting.
In which
Well,
case you give the address.
It was
Yeah,
always
right.
done by last name here in
Oh, it
voting.
was?
Yes,
It was,
and check
okay,
in.
up until,
There was a couple attempts that interim town clerks that changed that process.
oh, okay.
Once you
But,
get to a certain number of voters, it is statutory that you vote in by, you register,
it's precincts,
checked in
isn't
by
it?
voters.
Okay.
So
By
how- so we-
street. So
are
I
we-
feel as if we kept growing and growing, I'm like, we're gonna get there soon. might as well.
We'll be at
Started it that way,
50,000
so I just-
someday.
But wait a minute, but if I understood somebody who told me this past, even if it's printed by street, I was told that the L's was in one, some of the L's were in one book and some were in the other.
But
So it
that could
was-
be the same if it were last name, right?
No,
No,
you
it
could all,
shouldn't, it shouldn't
no,
be.
the Larch Lane and Larch Row were in 2 different books.
So we did it by number
Oh,
of
well, that has-
voters.
yeah.
That might, so if there were this many, I did counted by page, and I separate them equally. So if Larch Lane was over here and then,
It was confusing to some
Whatever,
voters.
yeah,
Because
they
they
would
could hear
go by
people
street.
over here checking in at Larch Lane, so they would get in this line and then find out that they had to go to this line.
okay,
So if you want to keep it by street, it would just keep all these same letters
I
together.
think that was.
I would agree with that. Otherwise, I don't mean like, and I'm indifferent. I don't care either way. I was just wondering how it would
neither.
expedite check-in to name, because if people were getting out of the,
What
like
would you
from,
like? What did
jumping
you-
from one
just
line to
tell me
another or
what you'd
something.
like.
I actually think it's quicker by name. I walk
Okay.
in, I say Harrison, which one? Catherine, Pleasant Street, yep, get my card.
Because you still have to turn the page.
Yep.
Whether you go by street or name.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's gonna
Yeah.
take that person the same amount of time, just.
I find myself, should I be saying this at a public meeting? Standing there thinking, okay, now, street, okay, so Pleasant Street, which line? And of course, I would have to do that with my name as well, but it's,
Why not?
but to Trudy's point, it's something that you come up with all the time,
It's fine.
your last name. Anyway, I don't have a strong feeling.
No legal requirement either way.
Okay.
Great.
Do what seems right.
Gee, there's
Name
no
sounds
law on
good.
that one,
There's
too?
not, there is a law for checking in at an election,
Oh,
and that
right,
is supposed to be by street.
Town meeting.
So then I figured it's
That's what I meant
easier to
with voting.
always do
Do
the
the
same.
same.
Yeah, that's why I said vote.
Depends on how many, I'd have to go back and look at Mass General Law, but check-in for the elections is divided, if you're in precincts, it's divided by street, and then, because you have to print but if it's one precinct, we always followed the rule, it was just last name. So it depends on the size of your voting location.
Could be.
We might just want to ratchet up the signage just a tad bit in
Yeah, 'cause
years of
my
a change.
eyesight-
Communication issue more than.
Yeah, that's all it is, yeah.
Just make sure it either, big sign.
Prominently
Big sign,
displayed.
there's a great spot for
Big
it.
sign.
Yeah.
Big sign, I think we should add a big sign.
Oh, there's plenty of
All
big
right,
signs.
perfect.
So add more poll workers to expedite registration.
Okay.
Would that help? I mean, if you had 17 people there, unless the names were in 17 different places, it wouldn't really help, right? You can only have one person per book.
Then you'd have to split your book 3 ways, and then I think it's going to be more confusing.
Well, that's why I'm asking the
Yeah.
question, is that something that would actually speed things up?
And this was something that came up in the couple days afterwards, and you said at the time, yeah, I'm gonna add 1 or 2 for next year, so I don't.
But and people could go in any line?
No, I guess what I'm saying is if you have 2 poll workers, you divide the population, say if we're going to do it by
Half.
name,
Mhm.
in half. But having 3 poll workers, if you're only going to divide it in half, doesn't help you.
No,
So is it helpful
divide
to
it by
you to
thirds.
divide it
Do
by
in
thirds?
thirds, like we
Would-
did for the
So
presidential.
would that be helpful and speed things up?
As
Or
long
would
as
you
there's
have trouble
proper
getting them?
signage and people could see what line they're supposed to be in, or have somebody standing at the front as what I call traffic control,
Traffic
telling out
contr-
which lines.
Yeah.
A
Traffic
through
control
Z or A
is important.
through C, just sort of throughout the process.
Oh, just keep mentioning.
Just keep mentioning people. If you see one line too short, then say, oh, if you're E through M, you're over here. Okay.
It's a small space is
I think
what
she's got
what
it.
I
Take
take
it,
from
move
that.
on.
Yeah.
Is if you have
I can
too many
take care of
people in
that.
there,
Yep.
we kill each other.
Great.
Okay, start promptly as soon as quorum is attained. Did we, it says yes,
we
yes.
did.
No, you didn't. No, everyone was waiting and waiting, I kept saying, just go.
So-
Waiting
There's a line.
after quorum?
Because there's a line, but just, you have your introductory remarks.
Right, so
I
that
don't
was,
think you all need to be there until we're ready to do vote.
in the commentary,
Just start.
we typically don't start anything until we've attained quorum. And we can start at 1 o'clock and do all our intro, and somewhere in the midst of things, assume, unless we're not
No one's
remotely
incoming.
close to quorum. You can, get going out of the gate at 1, and then, as we get into 1:20 or 1:30,
Because there have been people there since 11:30, ready for lunch, ready to go at 1. And then there's the people that come in at 1:10.
That's
So
right.
you could even, on your, your printed warrant, say preliminary remarks will begin promptly at 1 o'clock.
oh, no, because then we want,
they start
then people won't show up until
Then they won't.
1:30,
Okay, I see what
thinking
you're
that
saying.
Right.
the meat of town meeting isn't going to
Okay.
get started. I mean,
1
this
o'clock
year,
is-
and this year was an aberration,
Gosh.
but voting did not take place on Article 1 until 2:30.
Which was half of the issue.
Right,
And
and
again,
we're
I
going to
think
get
as
through
we
those
go
things.
through here,
Yep.
we're gonna see
Yeah.
that that's all gonna be taken
Okay.
care of.
Yep.
Okay, so we can move along.
So, but there's agreement that we
Start at 1.
Start at 1 and,
Yep.
Presuming,
Yep.
with some judgment. I mean, if we have,
yeah, unless we're really,
unless we're really far away from quorum,
Yep.
we don't want,
That's ever happened, yeah.
not usually. I
well,
love this
this
one.
for the continuation of town
Well,
meeting.
it
that was
did,
scary.
and then we really did have to wait, and it's a good thing we did, because if we'd cut it off when,
That's right, we would.
early, we would have not had the meeting, and we ended up being able to have it. I'm sorry. Shorten resident obituaries. Let me just see the explanation here.
Oh, I like that.
Suggested approach to list all residents' names on one PowerPoint slide and ask for a moment of silence. We used to only mention distinguished residents, which no one feels comfortable deciding. I would feel uncomfortable deciding who was distinguished
So
and
I
who
think then
wasn't.
we went to doing all.
We then, yeah, we
And
added.
that's a long list, but if we have them up there in big enough type that people can read
Was
them
this
nicely.
year's count bigger than prior years?
It's grown over the years because
We have
Paul
aging
knew who those
population.
distinguished residents were. So now we've just started adding every death.
Yeah,
So
when we made the
do it.
transition, he said, well, this is how I handled it. We all said, who's going to make that
Right, yeah,
decision?
that's a tough one.
So we just listed everybody.
So we put them on a slide and have a
Yep.
moment of silence for everyone who's passed in the last year.
Because then I don't have to struggle with pronouncing some of those.
That does, though, beg the question, if there is someone particularly distinguished, do we ignore that person?
If there is a person, for example, who worked for the town and you want to recognize that, you can put a little asterisk and just say, town assessor and whatever the years were. Or you could say, this is a lovely list of
That's the point,
people.
because we do flag lowering based on town service. So whether it's an employee or a selectman or
Mhm.
whomever.
They can have their name in bold.
Yeah. So you could do an asterisk that says former town employee or official.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
put the title behind.
Yeah, you could, yeah.
Okay. Shorten outside, that's another good one. Shorten outside presentations in intro. Advise residents giving such presentations that they have 3 to 5 minutes total, depending on content. I think someone will need to define for me anyway, I know some of them, but what we mean by outside presentations. These
Bruce
are,
and Brad.
Is it
Well,
No,
common?
oh.
this is actually,
I don't think it is
Not
Bruce and
public
Brad.
record.
Oh, I thought it
actually.
was.
no, this
Well,
was the 375th and other,
Oh.
this year, I'm trying to think, it was 375th and then thanking David Geeky for his service, which I don't think ran low.
That didn't run one, but it was on top of the
It was the 375th, I
Election
think, this
year.
particular.
senator representative.
Is it
Typical.
typical for your state reps to present at town meeting?
It is typical.
Is it?
Not at every meeting, but there are some state reps and senators that feel quite strongly that they should come and make a presentation. I also know that they care about not upsetting their constituency. So if you were to say, we would love to have you, same thing with the 375th, but we're asking you to limit your time, you have the ability to ask them. It can be awkward, you know.
Do we invite them, or they just come?
No,
Or we
no,
officially invite them?
oh, yeah,
Because
they're
I figured
invited every year.
they'd just come, because they call all the time to see when it is.
And this year, I think, again, because there was so much else in the lead up, their presentations maybe felt a little longer than they actually were, because I timed it all out, and it wasn't really anything longer than what we've had historically.
And I think their presence is very, very important. This is the only time of the year. Again, it's one time a year we do a lot of things, and most people don't ever get to see these folks or hear from them directly.
Yep.
I mean, which news media picks up Brad Hill? Nobody.
Facebook.
Yeah.
Brad Bruce Tarr? Occasionally,
Yeah.
but very rare.
So we would advise people that they have, including Bruce and Brad, I guess, to try to keep their comments,
Yeah.
Do about
Brief?
5 minutes, yeah.
and maybe they will, and maybe they won't for Bruce and Brad anyway. I don't think we can
They were
control
very
that.
good at the 375th. They followed directions very well.
Right.
They were not even intending to make comments in the 375th, is what Brad told me. They were surprised. So that's a good thing.
They asked.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as soon as, well, I won't get into that.
Yeah, let's not go there.
Okay, that was a little side
But
conversation.
now that you asked.
That was kind of a funny conversation.
One of the things I thought I would mention when I read this is several moderators that I know require any presentations to stick to particular time limits. They announce it as part of their introductory remarks, and they say, unless I hear any objection, I'm going to ask all presenters to try and limit their presentations to 3 to 5 minutes. Some of them have a very serious limit on that. Others allow, like the budget to be longer because it's much more involved. So that's something,
Linfield's actually putting in bylaws to limit their formal, what we were referring to as our formal presentations,
yeah.
to limit. And if they want to speak longer, then it takes the vote at the town
Yeah.
meeting.
And that, I don't think you need to have a town meeting vote, a town meeting bylaw for that. It is the meeting, not just the moderators, which I know that has not been suggested. So then when the moderator does make that request, it is a request, and then that also could be, and I think we've talked about this idea of kind of unanimous consent before, that the moderator would say, I've asked all presenters, and unless I hear any objections, pause for that, that will be the rule for this meeting.
I think it's rare for us to have presenters other than Brad and Bruce and the
Yeah.
budget. I think it's rare for us to.
Are you talking about all the presentations, the FinCom, Planning Board,
Yes.
all the presentations?
Yes.
It's not a bad idea to say that. It just would remind everybody.
Right.
Yeah, that's nice.
But as far as somebody coming in to present
Right.
an article, like if you've got a developer coming in and sometimes they want to talk with the
That's-
approval,
Yeah,
they can be limited as well. But
absolutely.
we rarely have those types of people.
Yeah, although if you're switching, and this is something to think about, everything has different kinds of consequences. If you're switching from the moderator kind of doing the intro and the articles to individual boards and committees, it may be the right time
right.
to kind of set an expectation for that, to say, look, we're trying to limit this. We're not looking to extend town meeting, nor are we looking to dramatically shorten it. We're shifting around some of the way that the procedures are going to be implemented. And as such, when you're making your presentation, we're going to ask you to limit your comments, to a reasonable time period, with 3 minutes to 5 minutes being the maximum. And that way, it's at least kind of helping people plan things out.
Okay.
That seems totally appropriate for the role of the moderator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Truncate FinCom operating budget presentation.
Sorry.
Can we do this? Yes. Do we want to do this? This, I'm reading. No. 23 minutes, passage of annual budget is key to the role of the ATM, and given complexity plus override vote now and in the future, residents should be given info about drivers to make informed decisions.
And I think, truncate or limit, you don't have to have a hard time limit, but I envision reverting back to a more traditional, budget presentation duration, right? And not have one that goes on for too long, because hopefully there will be fewer complexities and challenges in trying to convey different tax rate scenarios and everything else with, the corresponding articles 1 through 5. And I mean, it was a really, really tricky one
Yeah.
for everyone to get their heads around, and so that was a longer than normal presentation. It was anomalous, I hope, in that regard, not only in its override nature, but just in general. So I think a little bit shorter, and the feeling of it being a lot shorter, but I don't feel the need to shorten it otherwise.
Kind of the sentiment was that we didn't want to necessarily overreact and fight the last war in
Right.
looking forward.
Right.
Recognize some things were unique to last year.
Correct.
And leave it at that, and not necessarily try to reinvent it just for the sake of it.
Right.
Exactly, yeah.
We skipped over one.
Oh, we did?
Oh. Shorten moderator, is that? Shorten, I checked it off.
Shorten moderator.
Shorten moderator's conduct of meeting comments in intro.
Done.
Well,
Yeah,
someone
that's
will
in the
have to-
script.
So I mean, the past several years, it's several
Can
pages.
actually put it in the warrant book.
And that's what we said we'd do, is that we would just do just a one-pager on the conduct of ATM in the handouts for next year, or in the warrant book.
Which I think I suggested my first year, putting something about town rules. I think I'd given you something and asking if it could go in the warrant book.
I think that's a good idea. I think not saying anything at the beginning relative to the rules.
Please refer to your warrant book for town meeting rules.
I think,
I think you want to,
yeah, I mean, I think it's some general overarching statements about
courtesy
the
to
courtesy
others.
Right, yeah.
and
Yeah.
comments and,
Yeah.
But yeah,
Not
what did
referring
we
to-
yeah,
say?
it's
18?
shorten, not
Yeah.
eliminate.
Yeah.
Right, right.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that script that I've been given could go in the warrant book. As far as,
For the meeting conduct.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think people sit around and read the warrant book, though. So, and by the time you're saying to them, the rules are in the warrant book, you're a minute away from starting the meeting. So that's where I think there just
I
has to
think
be
they're
a
reading it when
balance.
Brad and Bruce are talking.
Well, that could be. Okay, did I?
Now limit.
Now we're on limit Hamilton Wenham Regional School District presentation to budget items only. Yes, we can. Should we is a question mark. 18 minutes. Town budget presentation does not include any highlights of goals achieved, so same standard could be applied to the schools. Oh, because he talked about
talked
who
about
got the
goals.
football scholarships.
Yeah.
Right, and there's obviously plenty that the town could speak to about what we've done this past year, what we're looking to do next year with,
And that's not
Photograph,
in the
everything
annual
else.
report.
and that was kind of the conversation around that.
The flip side of that for me is that he didn't say anything about the budget, relatively.
Excuse me.
Anything substantive,
That's-
particularly
that's
about the
good.
budget
That's a valid
and its
point.
related override.
It was almost an avoidal of it,
So,
yeah.
it's gone both ways. We've had superintendents who give an overarching thing, certainly about just the numbers, not about, achievements. But to say nothing, especially in a difficult year, is probably not ideal either. We can't control what he says, but I think we can suggest that.
He should provide you with his, if he's got slides, he should provide you to those so that they can be fit into the PowerPoint, and he can be limited that way.
We generally get it a couple days before, I want to say about Wednesday or Thursday the week of. But I could certainly, if the consensus is that we're really looking for the presentation to focus on the budget item, only fiscal, related items, that could be, when we have that conversation in February, I could let him know.
Seems to make sense to me. But.
It does, and I think it makes sense when you say that we don't, we don't say what we've done and good things about us, that we would just like to go right with business.
And, it's also in the context of, look, we came up with a list of 25 things to make the town meeting process go more smoothly and a little more expeditiously. This is one of those. So it's not as if we're singling out the schools
Right.
for a particular reason.
Right, that's me. Right.
And if the town was doing that, then I think if the town had a section of its budget presentation that said, here's where we want to be, here's what we think we've done, and then of course the school would be given the same courtesy, but the town limits itself. So I think the point in the comments about it being the same as what the town does is really important.
Yeah.
And they also have an opportunity at their budget hearing, throughout the year and at the budget hearing in particular to really focus on that type of information. And again, I think we're back to that same thing about where the town and the school committee can make the information available, which is that achievement, PowerPoint, however you want to characterize it, that can go right on the website for sure and be available to any registered voter or any resident who's interested.
Okay, you ready to move on?
Have they ever gone to warrant hearings? Has the school department ever
Oh,
shown up
yes.
at warrant hearings?
I can speak from 15 years of experience.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, we used to go to, the superintendent and the chair or the finance chair would either split them up, because sometimes they were at the same time, or we would go to both of them, one after another, always.
It seems like if we could stress the importance of the warrant hearing, people might be more apt to come and hear more and get more discussion.
So I'm
It seems as
assuming
if the whole
postcard
idea of the
have that
warrant hearing
information?
isn't as important to people
Yeah, it
as a lot
used
of
to
people.
be much better populated.
We used to do it at Bucher. I mean, I remember seeing the signs.
Right, right.
Short of actually taking a vote, it's every bit as important, if not more so, because you're going to have a greater deal of time in which to more thoroughly get in depth with.
Yeah, and then you have
questions.
time to go home and think about and share with your
Yeah.
neighbors and your people and come up.
So that's the get out the vote mailer we'd add. We'd not just speak to town meeting, we'd also give the warrant hearing date. So we'd get it out well in advance of the warrant hearing.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
Provide we've seen this one before. Provide PowerPoint handouts so residents can follow along. Yes, we can. Yes, we should. Presentation cannot be easily viewed by many residents. I'm going to just jump in here. Totally true. If we don't give people a handout, it's impossible to read that screen,
Thank
even
you.
from the
Even from where we are.
from the front.
Yeah,
So
so and that was part of what Trudy brought up earlier. There's this, what's up on the screen, then there's the motion sheet. So the motions are on the PowerPoint. So if we just give the printout of the PowerPoint, then everybody sees they've got it in their hands, same thing that's projected.
Right.
And there's no need for a separate motion sheet.
Right.
Can we
Right,
include
right.
on that what the vote is needed, whether it's a majority or two-thirds?
Yep, that's on the PowerPoint.
Oh, it
So
has been
yes,
on
it
the
would.
PowerPoint? Because it's not been in the motions, it's been in my book. Because I remember this year particular, I kept looking back at Lauren,
It's usually in
and
the
even though I've got my
narrative.
cheat sheet of what requires or asking Lauren, it was just awkward for me this last meeting that I kept referring to her. Is this two-thirds or?
I will double,
And I
we'll
mean,
make
I'll
it so
double check
going
too,
forward.
but, yeah.
We'll definitely make sure that the PowerPoint includes,
As long as there's no amendment to the motion
Right,
that changes the
exactly.
funding
Right,
source.
right.
Because if something went to stabilization or something,
Right.
then, or came from stabilization as a result of an amendment, it would change the quantum of vote.
Yeah.
So this may be later on, but we hear a lot of comments. So I think what you're saying is that the motion that we read, whoever's reading the motion, is the same as what's on the screen, and we don't read, I move what's on the screen.
Right.
well, no, so
No.
that's a separate conversation.
Okay.
And that's in the notes too.
Later?
No, that's in the
Oh.
notes, the notes for this item too, is.
Oh, yeah,
for
should be read in full.
Both ways, back and forth. What we have done generally over the past few years has just been to refer to the motion that is
Presented on the
Printed on
PowerPoint.
screen.
presented in the PowerPoint and on your motion sheet. And I know that you don't like that.
I know, I don't like
And is
that.
that, what is the point of that? Just for fewer spoken words?
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
But you don't read the full motion.
Okay.
I mean, we
Some of
can
the
clearly
motions-
see, if you've got a handout and there's a PowerPoint, I hate going someplace where somebody is reading word for word and it's visible there, or I've got it in a handout.
Right, except it's not visible.
Right, so,
That's
well,
why you
no,
have a
that's why
handout.
that's why I have the
They'll have the
motion.
handout.
Or you'd have
Yeah.
another screen out.
Right.
But it would shorten the meeting.
There are some motions that are incredibly long, especially some
Borrowing.
statutory language, borrowing.
True.
Right.
And I completely agree with you on that. But the comprehension of, I vote what's on the screen, which means vote what's on your page, means that someone has to either be looking at the screen at the right page in their book versus, here's the motion. I move that we spend X number of dollars on so-and-so. I just think that's clearer. And in the end, maybe it takes a little bit longer. I don't know.
I also agree, and if everyone has their motion and knows, and starting in January, whenever we're assigned them, they have longer time to investigate and invest themselves, they're more familiar with it, it's not that hard to read.
It's a good point, Catherine.
Yeah,
I like to
agree.
hear things
Sometimes
as
people
well.
can understand that they're hearing it more than
The
usually.
knitters would
So
like
you
that,
get
it's
them,
hard
you
to
give them
pull up
both.
the
They
paper
can
and-
read it, they'll hear it.
Right, yeah.
So, just so, I mean, I completely understand. I just want to know, so is there, like, how do
number
we
of
decide,
words in the
yeah,
motion.
what's too complicated and what's not? If it's, because I think part of it is, sometimes the articles are written in such a way that it's easy to say, I move to approve article whatever as written in the warrant, right? Rather than to repeat what's in the warrant in the main motion. So that's where we kind of started from. Well, why are we repeating exactly what the warrant says?
Because you're touching another sense in people. Sight, hearing, reading, they all play a role in decision-making. And there's a bit of deliberative time that goes on in a presentation of an issue or an item. I think having it spoken as well as written as well as on the screen, it's better assurance that you're going to get a more intelligent vote
Okay,
response.
yeah.
You're speaking to how do you make the distinction between something that we can just have on a screen and read versus something that's so long, we want to be saying,
Just look at, read it.
As written.
Read it.
So you know it when you see it,
Okay.
right? I mean, I
Yeah.
guess,
Yeah.
For lack of a better guy, I don't
I
think
think
we're
if
gonna
it
come up
fits
with
on one
anything.
PowerPoint, it's probably okay to read it.
Okay.
Okay.
That's just, but I think you're right. I think you can read it.
All right.
I feel like we did this one already. Are we back to seat cushions, or did we just skip right down to that early on?
That was
I
mentioned
mentioned it
earlier.
earlier.
John was eager to get
I
to the
saw
I
it
was
and
gonna
I thought
say,
it was
as I'm
just a
thinking,
stitch
I'm
and a
sitting
half.
on a cushion, and this is killing me.
Whoever
Rent,
came up with that one is
purchase
Very
cheap
thoughtful.
seat cushions. Actively
cheap.
checking options and getting cost estimates.
Yeah, that was back in April.
So we have about 300 seats that we set out.
I know in Provincetown, they do it as a fundraiser. So they own the seat cushions and they sell them for that meeting for $1 and they use it as a funding source.
idea.
And they return it?
Yeah. They don't really buy them.
You get to rent. a
They're
seat
renting
cushion
it for the meeting.
I love
for
that
$1.
idea.
Yeah.
Again,
They're gonna- they're
I'm
gonna
looking
say-
for things that,
Wait.
On a $19 million budget,
Residents
you
rent them?
can't
Right,
afford
exactly.
to spend X dollars on a seat cushion?
Well, they don't,
But you know-
they don't refuse somebody who wants one. They just say, a donation of $1 is
Okay.
encouraged.
All right.
And then they decided ahead of time what it should be used for.
Yeah,
So
it goes
it's,
to the scout
Yeah,
program.
Something
It
different every
engages
year or the
people.
same?
I don't remember. I could ask.
I think something different would be
I think
fun.
something different.
Okay,
And I think
there we
people
go.
could, maybe there'd be I'm thinking, you're so big into contests, maybe there's a contest of what will the money from the seat cushions be used for this year?
No more
Because
contests,
I keep
please.
thinking of the custodians, and I think this year was actually some of us, setting out 300 chairs, and then somebody dragging in 300 cushions, and then having to put them, each one or two people,
Yeah,
putting
your
them on
vote card.
300
So we go
chairs.
with the card.
But if you
You're
pick
gonna
up
need
your
more poll
own,
workers.
That you'll need somebody
I don't
for.
think you have to be a poll worker.
They just
to
have
sell
to get up
cushions, right?
and use the seat cushion to vote.
Yeah. Different color every year.
And they should have the town logo on.
It's a little bit, I won't say frivolous, capricious, but I think it'd be fun. I'm all about making this meeting a little bit more fun.
Well, then put a golden ticket under one of them. Oprah it up.
To do that? I don't know if we're allowed to do that. Like, put a raffle in with the town meeting, I don't know, we could get in trouble with that.
Raffle.
If we had a raffle permit though, maybe.
Well, it's definitely worth thinking about.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's, we'll check on purchasing costs.
Yeah, assuming that we'd make the money back. And I don't know, maybe you wouldn't purchase
We need to-
300, maybe you'd
we need to-
purchase 120.
Authorize a new revolving fund, is that what I hear?
Yeah. Or create it like a gift
The first
account.
120 gets them.
I think when I was saying donations, I meant like a donation for, food for the town meeting, or donation.
Food pantry.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I was actually thinking about it, a donation for the town. So it would be a donation, donate $1 for, I don't know,
Flowers?
Yeah, exactly. Something for the town. And you create a Chapter 44, Section 53A gift account. So it's essentially someone making a donation to the town, and it would be able to be expended by the Board of Selectmen for the purpose of the gift.
Funds, like
The
the veteran
education fund, the veterans fund, can we do it for that?
Tree planting?
Tree planting.
Hey,
I love it.
Beautification of the town.
Right, because we have a tree fund that we're just
Yes,
about
you
to.
absolutely could do that.
I think it's fun.
Okay.
If I weren't sitting in a meeting from 11 o'clock to 12, I would be happy to be one of the people standing out there.
Now, you see
Taking
why I mentioned
donations
this issue a little bit earlier, because it caught my eye, and I said, somebody's very clever here.
Yeah, maybe we
Next
can
one's a good one.
get some kids.
Pretty easy.
No,
Sign
we
them up.
We already did that one.
You know,
keep going. That's why I thought you were gonna give me the same answer. Got it, done. Anything with the moderator, just keep going.
talked about that.
We talked, we're.
Talked about the next one.
Okay,
Yep, next
moving
one.
along on the second page already.
Already talked about that
We
one.
talked about that
Wait,
one.
can I, so moderate, yes. Well, that's worth
Don't rush
repeating,
it,
though.
that's right.
I think that one is worth repeating. That people who are responsible for a particular article need to own it and not assume that the moderator is going to explain the whole thing and answer the questions. I mean, I know for myself, okay, I'm assigned to answer a question, but I may be the third person down. And so I'm just going to assume the first person's going to answer. I think all of us are going to have to take more responsibility for
Owning a
owning
piece of the meat.
the understanding of what the
Yeah.
warrant article
And that's
is.
going to happen in February.
It's got to happen in February.
But
Oh,
with that, I
that's
think
okay.
we need to concentrate on keeping it brief, so that
Absolutely.
you don't, not you personally, but somebody doesn't get up there on their soapbox and just keep at it.
Right.
So that is the one thing that we have to keep in mind with the presentations, which is why I think the script will be still helpful to have as a
Yes,
guideline.
I agree.
So to make sure that the presentations are, informational, and not clearly leading to a meeting.
And is the next point too kind of related in that you need both a person to respond to questions from a board or committee, but what about like budget questions, let's say?
Right.
Is there a staff person who's kind of lined up?
Yep.
Because I think that some of the questions that were asked last year were really staff questions and not board questions
Well, I
or
think all
committee
department heads
questions.
are required to attend, aren't they?
But it wasn't clear, I think, internally, the way our process was set up, kind of when that moment came for Trudy or the selectmen or
Right.
the FinCom to kind of turn to me or the finance director, whoever, to
Right.
say, okay, this is yours. And
Yeah.
so I think that,
Again, that's part of prep and making sure that people know what their roles are.
Yep.
We are going to have to make that very clear because, again, historically, our town administrator does not say much.
Right.
It used to be that our FinCom
Spoke.
director didn't say much.
Finance
Oh,
director.
the finance, no, our FinCom
Chair.
chair basically just read the line items and asked for holds.
Right.
We've morphed into that person making a presentation.
Right.
But again, the finance director could be involved in doing some of that. But so we're gonna have to make that clear, because it's not necessarily what we've been doing for
But
those
as
of
far
us
as
who've been doing it
staff
for-
members, you're also talking department heads?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, which
And we
would
used to do
be
that.
in the close vicinity,
Right.
so that they could jump right up when
Police,
there
fire,
was,
Right.
DPW.
Yep.
If we needed a new fire
not
truck.
in the back,
someone
right
would
in the
be there.
front, so that
Right.
they should be,
And I
Pet
have.
peeve of Diane.
yeah.
I know there's a cultural aspect, but there's also a real service to the town that can be provided by having the persons who are dealing with it on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
Be in that support role.
Absolutely, and I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting that it shouldn't
Of
be
course
that
not,
way.
of course.
I'm just suggesting that people ought to know that
Right.
you
Yeah.
may not have been called
Be
on in the
prepared.
years past,
Yeah.
but you might get called on this year, so be ready.
Yeah.
Clarify, did we answer this? Clarify which person is first on?
Yep.
Extend, oh, this is a good one. Extend town babysitting hours beyond 4 PM. And I guess, can we do this, is a question mark. I guess that's because it's not under our control. Check with Honor Society to see if we can get them to extend it to 6 PM next year. Is that in anticipation of the meeting possibly going longer than 4 and people leaving?
Part of the issue this past year, the feedback that we got after the fact was that it wasn't necessarily a coincidence. Yes, we just finished the marijuana warrant article that had taken the better part of an hour. And there was some maybe more routine articles, and we can get to how we lay out the warrant article order and everything in the next item. But it was also babysitting ended at 4, and so a lot of people left at that same time. So
Oh, I
we lost
didn't know
quorum for
that.
that reason as well.
Where was the babysitting?
At the rec center.
Okay, that's what I thought. So it's not resident in the building?
No.
It's
It's
so they
for,
can have a group
it's for
of people.
Hamilton and Wenham, you know,
So-
all day. It starts
They've been there
at
since the morning.
9
Yeah, probably.
and runs to 4.
Oh, it's all day?
Well, it would
Yes,
have
for
because of
Hamilton in the
Hamilton.
morning,
And there could be
Yeah.
overlap,
Oh, I
though.
see.
I
So
mean,
it's-
Hamilton
there's
could go
overlap.
past
which they
1,
generally
Right.
do.
and we
I
could
didn't know
obviously
all
go
this.
past 4.
Right, but that was part of the reason why
We lost
there
people.
was that
I didn't realize
exodus
that.
around that time. Yep,
So some,
that
so it's the
helped kill our
Honor
town.
Society.
it's another factor.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, Dana left to get my youngest, who was there. Yeah, and I remember
at
that
that
she came
point,
and found someone else to watch her, and
Yeah.
back she came for a quorum. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's all
So,
coming
yeah,
back
so
around.
someone's
we
going
figured that
to,
out.
So we'll definitely
Check with them.
confirm that.
yeah, okay. I love this, strategic approach to warrant, I was wondering, I remember this, strategic approach to warrant article order.
An interesting article every half hour.
Right.
So I attended Rockport's meeting last year, and they actually do a lottery. She has a blue Crown Royal bag. and
Could be any kind of bag.
Could be any bag.
Exactly.
Crown Royal is
Just stuck in your head.
Somebody told me, I didn't recognize it, somebody told me.
Right.
It's not
And
statutory.
Scrabble tiles.
Yeah.
So she would pull a tile, and they would, now, if it was a CPA article, they would take everything that was with that particular article. But it was quite interesting, because you didn't know when your article would be coming up.
They have a two-part rule about how they choose the order. One part is numbered, and then the other articles that are not those numbered articles that are required, then those go into the lottery. So it's kind of, there's 1 through whatever, and then there's A through whatever.
So 1 through whatever is budget,
Fixed.
regular
Yes,
stuff?
exactly.
Okay.
And then the
Then
rest of
other
it.
I
ones
see, okay.
are.
I was only there for part of it.
Yes,
so
I just happened to know.
Okay.
And that makes a little more sense, because
That
I
would
worry.
shake it all up.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's great, because I've seen meetings where, for instance, the school budget article will be last, and
Right,
people will
and
just
nobody
wait and
comes
come at the
until-
end.
right.
But if
Right.
it's first, people come and vote and leave.
Yeah.
So the idea of not knowing exactly, I mean, you might know a general time frame, but you don't know exactly.
Oh, no,
when.
they do it ahead of time. It's when the warrant is printed, so you do know where the articles are.
Not the lettered articles. They drew them that night. The one that I went to.
So they don't have to do them in
That's-
the order of the warrant book? So you could maybe look into that?
Whoops.
I'm gonna have to look at that and see what it says. I don't know.
Maybe they're doing it wrong.
No
I
comments
was
anymore.
gonna say,
I am
I
done
think you might know
commenting on the
somebody
town of Rockport.
who works in Rockport.
We're done.
But it's an interesting concept that might be worth looking into.
Well, the concern is very real, because we have each year tried to position, and I don't think we've done that the last couple of years, particular articles in places so that we don't lose people, because they walk out after you've voted on that. And that's, you know, Paul has been a prime critic of, now you're all gone. Well, what are you doing to the meeting here? You abandoned the meeting. So I think that's very important, and whether you do it by a lottery, I think that's a clever idea.
If it's
or a
legal.
Crown Royal bag.
Sure, it's I wonder, I think part of the reason there was the issue with the quorum, obviously, is because the meeting was so long. And so many of the things that you're looking at doing are intended to streamline, at least, yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe,
Babysitting one alone.
But it wasn't long. I mean, well, we had more articles than what we're used to, but I always planned to be there till 5 or 6 o'clock anyways. I mean, 10 years ago, we always counted on.
yeah.
Well,
So maybe
I
the
forget what time the
babysit-
Kentucky Derby started, what Paul wanted to get it
Right.
out of
5 o'clock.
We have to be out of here by
5 o'clock.
Kentucky Derby time, so let's move, folks.
It was perceived to be longer than it actually was, and it was longer than it needed to be.
Right.
But it wasn't ridiculously long.
That's where I feel like we're doing a lot of
Right.
important, some minor, some not as minor changes. I'd be worried about
Big.
doing that kind of major change in terms of format, and that then kind of occupying our attention, or town meetings.
The lottery kind of thing.
Doing a lottery kind of setup. I feel like maybe we make all
Right.
these changes, we see how it goes.
Right.
We see how many warrant articles we have, if all the other changes have put us in a better position, we feel like, before making a really fundamental.
Yeah, but maybe still some view to
Fair,
strategic placement of
Right.
articles.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
I think, there was, I seem to recall a conversation about, where we should put the operating override, the front end, the
Didn't
middle,
know
the
what to
end,
do with the marijuana.
CPC, all of it, so.
Right, okay. Yeah, there is a point to, we could go too far with this, and it's so different that people get disconcerted or disoriented by it, distracted.
But once they check in by name, it'll all be.
It'll be fine. I know, I'm gonna be all
Right,
set.
exactly.
Starting at
I
11
have never
with
forgotten my
7.
name.
And there'll be like pads. It's gonna go so fast.
Full pads, yeah, exactly.
The consent calendar concept.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
something,
I
Yeah.
had that actually on my
Yeah.
list too.
That's an extra one?
An extra one, that
well,
was, so, yeah.
the reason
We-
I bring it up here is because of the strategic planning.
Yeah, so we've had it historically, it's been
Yeah.
pretty limited, the past several years, handful of articles, and the question is whether we want to expand it at all. And I think that kind of depends on what the articles are, but I think it's something worth considering.
Oh, keep it in mind, right. Take a look and see what's.
So what happened in April, just clarification, to start the consent calendar was at the last of the article before, so when I flipped the tab, that script went with it. So wherever the consent calendar is going to be, it should start the tab and not end the last one. Does that make sense?
Sure. I'll
I mean,
go
that's-
back
I
and
mean,
look at-
that's
Yes,
what
it makes
happened,
sense.
is-
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
I don't know
Clearing-
how
it's
much
clearing your
time, I
mind.
don't know how much time it saves.
I mean, I
The
don't either,
consent
I mean.
calendar, I feel like.
The only reason to do it, or the real reason to do it, is if there's things that have absolutely no debate, so that it's really just taking up time versus helping a discussion about the business of the town. Yeah.
And it's also, I think to Diane's point, if you've got a consent agenda on 3 or 4 articles,
Right,
by the
it's just
time,
as
but
quick,
by the
right.
time you explain what a
Exactly.
consent
Right.
agenda was, we could
Exactly.
have just done those 3 or 4
That's
motions.
exactly.
Yeah, so it depends on the number and the nature
Right,
of the
okay.
warrant.
If that,
Routine, if they're that.
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
So sometimes what they do in the warrant book is they specifically put the stars next to it and say something like, the moderator is of the opinion that these articles involve very little debate, and the meeting would be served by voting them in a single vote. Please review them before the meeting, and if you object to the consent calendar, notify the moderator, at the time the consent calendar is called, immediately come to your microphone. And that way, that whole kind of discussion is also streamlined. So, if you're printing the rules in the book anyway, and you decide that there are 5 articles that are no discussion that are appropriate, maybe you try to do the explanation there rather than the fuller explanation at town meeting. But it depends what the articles are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, get out the vote mailer to residents prior to town meeting, yes. Can we do it, or should we do it, question mark, similar to what we did for ATM Part 2 this year, at a cost of about $700. That was a single-page mailer to every resident?
It's a postcard mailer.
Yeah.
Postcard mailer, and, I think it helped.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's something that, again, relatively short money and could include not just the town meeting date, but the warrant hearing date as well.
And the options in or out.
Jackie?
And the options in or out.
I think we should also include, by that time, maybe having a space on our website where we've got preliminary materials that, as was
For the
discussed
website.
before, the planning board materials for their articles, any kind of budget presentation from a forum, and having a link to our website with all the materials in one place, so that when they get the 2 dates, they can see oh, it's on our website in this spot. so they could easily find it online quickly too that day if they wanted to start looking at things.
Yeah, and I think that that's a timing issue,
That's
because
true.
if we're getting it out well in advance of the warrant hearing, then I don't know how much we're gonna have finalized to put up on the website.
But we might have preliminary, like what the planning board is recommending,
Yeah.
that public hearing process could be over.
It was incredibly important for the second town meeting,
Yeah.
because there were so many people that didn't even know there was a second town meeting.
Yep.
We had a number of people that came to the second that didn't come to the first, and vice versa.
Even putting the town's website on there, if you have a town meeting link, just saying, remember to check the following link for town meeting materials is probably enough to get people to check it,
Right.
even if they're not immediately there. You could say, check back for more information or something.
Sure.
Okay, set up date, this is the last one that I have. Set up date of second town meeting session in advance and make motion to continue meeting if quorum is lost. We've always done that. I don't know why we didn't this
It
year.
wasn't done. I don't know that I've ever seen a continuation in the first article or the first motion.
I feel like we always had a second day planned and
Really?
didn't use it.
Hamilton,
Am I
as
thinking it
the
'cause I
building
went to
use
so many-
coordinator, Hamilton
Yeah.
always has.
Yeah.
Wenham never scheduled a
Okay,
second
maybe
date
I'm
at
just
Bucher.
thinking
And
of
she
my
just
school
put
The
in
committee.
first
I
article
was
said
there.
it's voted on and
never-
done with.
Yeah, I mean,
So they never
then we're
scheduled,
not all
maybe they had
standing there looking at our
scheduled
calendars.
one amongst themselves, but they never booked. the
Yeah, and
people.
it may be from school committee days where I went to both of them, that I'm
Yes.
thinking of Hamilton. But would that be such a bad,
Nope.
would that be a bad idea?
That's-
no.
Linfield
makes all
does it every time.
Sense in the world to me.
They do.
That's why it was a yes, yes.
A preliminary motion is
Yeah,
that, and
to have
again,
it
that can
ready.
be printed if you know in advance what that second date might be.
And that would be the plan.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
remember how much time we took.
It was forever.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yes,
can't remember.
it felt
What are
like
you
it was
talking
forever.
about?
I'm not sure if it was forever, but it certainly felt like
We
it.
would come up with the one date and then 17, no, we can't do that.
But if you want,
And again,
We can rehash it, yeah.
that makes us look like we know what we're doing.
Right,
And we're
right.
just not standing there, everybody
As
comparing.
opposed to a doodle poll on the fly.
Yeah.
Totally
Town
on the
meeting.
fly, yeah.
And
Again,
again, that might depend on the number of articles.
And probably just having
Or-
the date means it doesn't happen.
Just have it in there in case you
Absolutely.
don't meet your quorum. At least you've got another date
right.
if you don't meet quorum.
And people know in advance, that
Right.
we know about, that we've booked a room for. I mean, there's a lot of
Right.
good reasons to do that.
Plan A and Plan B.
Were there things that people had on their list that they added after this list was printed? Oh, gosh, Peter's got like half a page.
No, I
No, those are your notes.
just my notes, the one, no, that we already talked about the
Okay.
consent agenda, and that's again variable year to year, so that was. the
I've
only-
covered all mine that I had.
I guess I would just ask what we think the next steps, if any, should be to this type of general discussion. Did we talk about everything we need to talk about? Do we need to meet again generally sometime before?
I think maybe I could, based on everybody's feedback, just do a final update and circulate it around to everyone.
You are so good at that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the best.
Or just put it into practice.
Well, yeah, but,
Well, you go with
Yeah,
yeah, of course,
yeah, a
but
lot
I
of
think
things that
then
we-
if
we're all-
everybody's,
Yeah.
we're all on the same page, we've all got this, and these are kind of our marching
Jack
orders
is
for.
watching this, so he's
Because
got
5
it.
minutes
That's
after we
right.
leave
Jack is
tonight,
sleeping.
everybody's going to be thinking about something else, but not this.
Well, and we're all sure that later on, we actually agreed to what we think we agreed to.
Yeah, and then as we work through the process, this will obviously
Yeah.
be our guidepost.
I thought this was great. I think it was a great discussion. We got a lot of things done. I think we made some changes that were pertinent for last year, but also some that were would be useful at any point in time. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else from the.
Oh, at the next
fellows-
meeting, Trudy and I will make sure there's a bag of Crown Royal.
Oh, yeah, with Scrabble chips in it?
With the bottle inside of it.
Just so that you could use the bag. you had to
We don't
finish
do
the
that.
It's just a plan. It's just for a plan.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
don't do that
that's
at
right.
meetings. Okay, so if we're done, which I'm going to try to quickly do, from my fellow selectmen, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Selectmen adjourned. The rest of you, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.